I got into a traffic accident after a follow-up appointment at the hospital. I was rushed back into the emergency room with broken ribs. The doctor urgently called my son and said, "He is badly injured, he may not survive." Then my son calmly replied, "He always exaggerates. Call me when it's time to bury him." I woke up alone until a mysterious man handed the nurse a signed document agreeing to pay my entire hospital bill and warning me about something horrifying concerning the son I loved with all my heart. A small note: certain details have been altered for the purposes of storytelling. The message underneath is what truly counts. I've spent enough years as a physician to spot when something is wrong even when the ailment has nothing to do with the body. That October morning carried just enough chill to keep the coffee hot where it sat on the porch rail. Quiet too, still enough that the Johnsons' rooster 3 houses off came through clear as a bell. I'd been taking that same wooden rocking chair every morning for 4 years, running a medical textbook propped open across my knees that I had no real interest in reading. The name is Conrad Aldridge, 69 years old. For 35 years I tended to this town's injuries out of a modest clinic on Main Street, then sold my stake and traded it all for this porch. Peace was what retirement was supposed to deliver. Retirement. Welcome back to Grandpa's Revenge. I'm glad you're here with me today. If these stories of family loyalty and hard-won justice mean something to you, I'd be grateful if you'd hit like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. Before we begin, I want to ask you something. When someone wrongs you deeply, do you believe in speaking up right away, or do you think patience and silence is the stronger path? Drop your answer in the comments. I read everyone. One more thing before we get into the story. Some details here have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. It's the truth inside the story that matters. Peace mostly had meant finally noticing what I'd been too occupied to catch before, like my son's visits 11 times across the past 3 months. I'd been tallying them the way I once tallied a patient's respirations, quietly, methodically, watching for a pattern that had no business being there. The year before Mirabelle passed, Derek had come by 4 times total. The year after, twice. Now here he was, turning up every week, sometimes 2 times in 7 days, always wearing that same careful smile, always landing on the same question: "How are you feeling, Dad?" Derek Aldridge. My 43-year-old son wheeled a silver Audi that cost more than my first house-brokered commercial real estate in Nashville and said "Dad" with the rehearsed warmth of a man who'd been practicing his lines. This was not devotion. This was symptomology. I brought the coffee to my lips and studied the empty road. Brentwood, Tennessee, population 8,000, had no interest in stirring early on a Monday. The hardware store had another hour before its lights came on. Down at the diner, the first wave of regulars was already seated. Farmers, early retirees like me, bodies that had forgotten how to lie in past dawn. What does my son need from me that calls for this much rehearsal? The question settled in my mind the way a diagnosis settles before you give it a name. You can see exactly what you're looking at. You're just deciding how to say it so the patient doesn't come apart. Only this time I was the patient, and I couldn't determine what I was meant to understand. I turned a page in the textbook, didn't read a word of it. Mirabelle had given me that book 3 Christmases back, Internal Medicine Review. I'd never had call for it in general practice, but I'd wanted it all the same. Putting it back on the shelf wasn't something I could make myself do. Hauling it out to the porch each morning felt like honoring a promise to someone no longer around to see whether I'd kept it. The silver Audi swung onto my street at exactly 8 o'clock. I set the coffee cup down with care. My hands didn't waver. 35 years of practice had seen to that. Derek cut the engine and climbed out, already arranged into his weekend uniform khakis, buttoned down, the studied look of an office man who wanted to read as approachable. He was saying something to someone in the passenger seat. A stranger. A man I'd never laid eyes on, perhaps 52, expensive rimless glasses catching the morning light, a leather briefcase matched to his shoes. The sort of deliberate polish that signals either genuine competence or a very costly con. Derek had brought company. My son came up the porch steps with his hands in his pockets, that rehearsed ease draped over everything he said. "Dad, you're up early." "Same time as always," I said. "I brought a friend, hope that's all right. We were just passing through." "Just dropping by," I noted. Not a question. Brentwood wasn't on the way to anything unless you lived here. Nashville sat 40 minutes north. Derek lived in Nashville. The stranger was already studying me. Not the way a new acquaintance looks curious, slightly tentative. This was clinical. It was the look I used to fix on patients the moment they walked through my exam room door, assessment inventory, searching for the signs they wouldn't volunteer themselves. He came around the car, shut the door with the quiet precision of someone in no hurry to appear hurried, and carried that briefcase the way I used to carry my medical bag, like it held everything that mattered. Derek gestured toward him. "This is Stafford Gilmore. We've been collaborating on a project." Stafford extended his hand. The grip was firm measured, not performing strength. "Mr. Harmon, good to meet you." "Doctor," I said. He blinked. "Pardon." "Dr. Aldridge. Retired, but I still use the title." "Of course." His smile returned, glasses tilting as he adjusted them. "Derek mentioned you were a physician. 35 years in practice, is that right?" "That's right. Remarkable commitment, general practice. Family medicine, minor procedures, stitches, fractures, nothing specialized." He dipped his head as though I'd confirmed something he'd already written down. "And you retired 4 years ago." 4 years this past June." Derek edged closer, filling the quiet. "We were actually talking about memory just the other day, Dad. Stafford was saying how ordinary it is to misplace small things as we get older. I told him your memory runs sharper than mine. I looked at my son, then at Stafford, then back at my son. And there it was, the diagnosis I'd been circling. Stafford Gilmore was no friend, no real estate colleague. He was an evaluator. I'd watched him collect that briefcase with the unhurried precision of someone who had run this errand many times before. He hadn't glanced at my house the way a visitor would. He'd inventoried it the way I used to inventory an exam room. My son had brought me a doctor. But what kind of doctor makes house calls on a man who doesn't yet know he's the patient? I showed them inside. Derek moved through the living room as if he'd paced the route beforehand, steering Stafford toward the burgundy velvet sofa Mirabelle and I had picked out 30 years ago. The fabric had held up remarkably dense, unfaded, despite the decades. I'd never had a reason to replace it. "Coffee?" I asked, hands resting on the back of my armchair. "No, thank you." Stafford settled his briefcase beside his feet with the ease of someone beginning an official consultation. "Derek tells me you were a family physician here in Brentwood for quite some time." 35 years, I said, keeping my voice level. "Extraordinary. You must have watched this town shift considerably over the years." "Some." Derek had taken the armchair across from me, hands laced in his lap, watching, not joining in, just watching with an intensity that made something prickle beneath my skin. Stafford's smile was smooth, a practiced extension of the lips. "I specialize in elderly health, gerontology, cognitive wellness, that sort of thing." "Derek mentioned you'd been retired a few years, and I thought a casual visit might be welcome. People your age so often have illuminating perspectives on aging." "People my age," I repeated, letting the phrase drift in the air like smoke. "The wisdom that experience brings, I mean." He leaned in, adjusting his glasses. "So tell me, Conrad, may I call you Conrad?" "Dr. Aldridge is fine." A brief pause. Stafford's smile slipped by a fraction before locking back into place. "Of course. Dr. Aldridge, what day is it today and what month are we in?" And there was question 1. The Montreal Cognitive Assessment. I had given it myself dozens of times to patients whose families feared dementia. Orientation to time, orientation to place, short-term recall, verbal fluency. 10 minutes if you moved briskly, 15 if you were thorough, 40 if you meant to dress it up as ordinary conversation. Stafford was going for 40. I let my gaze drift toward the window, toward the autumn leaves. I furrowed my brow. Tuesday. No Thursday. And the month? It's September. My granddaughter Calla just had her birthday last week, or was that 2 weeks ago? Derek leaned forward. "Dad, it's Monday, October." Right. October." I waved a hand loosely. "The days run together once you retire. You'll find out." Stafford produced a small notebook from his jacket pocket and wrote something down. "And your granddaughter's name is Calla," Derek said quietly, his eyes fixed on mine. "Her name is Calla, Dad." I blinked, looking thrown. Did I say something else, silly old mind? Another note. Stafford's pen moved without a pause. He was enjoying himself. "It happens," he said smoothly. "How have you been feeling overall? Any difficulty sleeping, keeping track of appointments?" "Sleep's fine. Don't have many appointments worth tracking these days." "Fair enough. Any hobby's a daily routine you stick to." I started in on the medical textbook out on the porch, then let myself wander into a rambling account of a patient I'd treated in 1991, or was it 95, who'd presented with chest pain that turned out to be anxiety, or perhaps a minor infarction. I couldn't quite land on it. I let sentences unravel, repeated myself twice, watching Stafford from the edge of my vision. He kept writing. "Do you know what it feels like to sit there and watch your own son audition you for incompetence?" Derek didn't step in to correct me this time. He just sat with his hands still clasped, nodding now and then like a man watching a rehearsed tragedy play out exactly as expected. Stafford asked me to name today's date. I said the 13th. It was the 26th. He asked me to count backward from 100 by sevens. I reached 79, then stopped pressing my fingers to my temples and murmuring that I'd lost the thread. He asked me to hold on to 3 words Hammer River Candle and recall them 5 minutes later. I recalled Hammer. The other 2 river and candle slipped away entirely. When Stafford offered a gentle hint, I called them tool and table. 40 minutes of calculated, deliberate failure. By the time Stafford finally rose and shook my hand again, his smile had hardened into something purely clinical. "It was wonderful meeting you, Dr. Aldridge. Thank you for your time." "Anytime," I said, arranging a vague, pleasant expression across my face. "Always good to have company." Derek walked him to the front door. I stayed in the living room, tracking the low conspiratorial murmur of their voices on the porch. The heavy oak door swallowed the exact words, but I didn't need them. I'd seen Stafford's notebook. I'd seen the deliberate way he underlined certain phrases. Derek came back inside and eased the door shut with a soft click. "You okay, Dad?" "Fine, why wouldn't I be?" "Just checking." He glanced down at his watch. "I should get moving. Important meeting in Nashville this afternoon. Drive safe." He lingered at the door, hesitating. "Actually, would you mind if I stayed over tonight? It's getting late and I've got an early call tomorrow. Easier to take the guest room." "Suit yourself," I said, keeping my tone perfectly indifferent. I waited until I heard his car settle into the garage and his heavy footsteps retreat up the stairs. Then I walked into my study and pulled the door shut behind me. The old computer took 2 agonizing minutes to wake up. I typed Stafford Gilmore, Tennessee into the search bar and waited. Third link, down Tennessee physician under investigation for Medicare, billing fraud Davidson County, 2022. I clicked through, read the article twice, and printed it. The page came out of the printer warm. I set it on the mahogany desk with a sound that rang louder than it should have in that quiet house. I pulled a brand new white folder from the bottom file drawer, wrote Derek's name on the tab in sharp black ink, clipped the page inside, slid the folder back and locked the drawer. Then I sat completely still and listened to the house. 9:30. Derek's voice drifted down from upstairs muffled, but the old brass heating vents carried it well enough. He was on the phone. "Needs to be done before Christmas," he was saying, his tone clipped and businesslike. "He doesn't know a thing. You saw him today. He couldn't even remember what month it is." A stretch of silence while he listened to the other end. "I need you to sign one more report, Stafford. Put heavy emphasis on memory loss and severe disorientation. The court's going to want ironclad documentation." Another pause. "Once the court approves the conservatorship, I'll transfer the Brentwood house into the trust immediately. Then we move on the rest of the assets." I stopped breathing, not from shock, but from discipline. 35 years of medical practice had trained me to stay absolutely still when someone was about to say more than they intended. But Derek had shifted gears. His voice loosened, went casual. "Yeah, I'll be back in Nashville tomorrow, just staying here tonight to keep up appearances. The old man is completely clueless." I heard him laugh, a dry, dismissive sound. I reached over, switched off the desk lamp, and sat in the thick dark of my study without moving. 35 years as a physician had taught me one undeniable truth. A misdiagnosis is far more dangerous than no diagnosis at all. I needed more evidence, and I needed time. My son, it was clear, had no intention of giving me either. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. He thought he was running a game against a defenseless old man. He forgot that I was the one who taught him how to play. There are accounts you keep not for the money, but for what they hold in memory. I didn't sleep that night. The silence pressed down on the house, suffocating and relentless, thick with the ghosts of 35 years of family life that now felt entirely compromised. At precisely 6 o'clock the next morning, well before the autumn sun had so much as hinted at the horizon, I took my place at the kitchen table. The coffee maker was working through its slow, rhythmic brewing cycle, sending a rich aroma through the room that offered no real comfort. I opened my laptop. The harsh glow of the screen lit up the dim kitchen. The house sat dead silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sharp creak of old wood in the foundation. With steady, deliberate fingers, I typed in the bank's web address and logged into the joint checking account. Mirabelle and I had opened back in 1976. It had been the financial spine of our lives together, the account we'd relied on faithfully across 41 years of marriage. Every significant milestone was recorded in its digital archive. Decades of mortgage payments on this very house, car purchases, family vacations, and the generous down payment we had proudly put toward Derek's first apartment in Nashville. After Mirabelle died, I simply stopped using it. I couldn't bring myself to look at it, let alone draw from it. I left it sitting there with exactly what remained at her passing, $9,214.00. A private monument. A digital memorial I had never mentioned to anyone, not even Derek. According to the screen, the last login had been in November 2017, the month after she died. I took a slow breath to steady my pulse and clicked into the transaction history. My eyes moved down the recent entries and the breath caught hard in my throat. 3 substantial withdrawals, all within the past several weeks. The first September 8th, $2,500. The second September 19th, $3,000 flat. The third September 27th, $2,800. Total taken, $8,300. My hands went still on the keyboard. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I scrolled to the bottom of the page and navigated to the authorized user section. 2 names appeared in cold, sterile text. Conrad Aldridge, authorization date, June 12, 1976. Derek Aldridge, authorization date, September 15, 2023. I stared at that second line until the letters blurred and stopped making any sense. I closed my eyes and counted backward from 10, the same way I used to center myself in the surgical prep room before a difficult procedure. I opened them again, half expecting a glitch, a hallucination born of exhaustion. The line was still there. September 15th, just over 3 weeks ago. A signature I had never given. An online authorization form I had never seen, let alone approved. My own son had forged my consent, added himself to his deceased mother's memorial account, and systematically drained it of nearly everything we'd left behind. I shut the laptop and looked up at Mirabelle's framed photograph on the kitchen cabinet. 43 years of love, sacrifice, and shared memory reduced to an overlooked memorial account that our only son was now using as his personal, fraudulent cash register. The coffee maker gave a loud final beep. I didn't move to pour a cup. "I'm sorry, Mirabelle," I said quietly to the photograph, my voice catching slightly in the empty kitchen. I wasn't watching closely enough. I let him do this. Mirabelle looked back at me from the silver frame with that gentle, familiar half-smile she'd worn in every photograph taken after 1990, the year Derek graduated from high school. It was the expression of a mother who was fiercely proud, eternally hopeful, absolutely certain that our boy would turn out to be a good and honorable man. She had been wrong about him. So had I. I set my jaw and opened the laptop again. With cold, clinical focus, I captured high-resolution screenshots of the evidence. 3 separate images. The recent withdrawal history, the unauthorized user modification page, and the current balance $914.16 remaining. I saved them into an encrypted folder on the desktop and named it Evidence, appending the date directly into the file name. Then finally I poured the mug of black coffee and went to sit on the front porch, watching in silence as the cold autumn sun hauled itself slowly up into the sky. On Wednesday afternoon, I met Garrett Kincaid at the Brentwood Golf Club for our long-standing weekly round of 18 holes. We had been playing that same course together for over 20 years, every single Wednesday, when Tennessee's unpredictable weather would permit it. Garrett was 71 years old, but his mind remained as razor-sharp as the day he'd stepped down from the Tennessee Circuit Court bench 2 decades prior. Over the years, he had beaten me on the green often enough to keep my competitive ego thoroughly humbled. We played in relative silence for the first hour. It wasn't until the 7th hole, after I uncharacteristically botched a drive, sending the ball slicing hard into the thick, unforgiving rough, that I decided to ask the question I'd been quietly rehearsing for 3 agonizing days. "Garrett." I began pretending to clean the face of my club. "What do you happen to know about Tennessee guardianship and conservatorship law?" He stopped in his tracks, looking up from where he was carefully lining up a putt. "Why on earth would you ask Conrad?" "Just curious," I said, keeping my tone as light and offhand as I could manage. Garrett sank the putt with a practiced, effortless stroke, marked his scorecard with a small pencil, then turned to study me. He wore the same unblinking, heavy expression he had undoubtedly leveled at evasive witnesses in his courtroom for years. "You don't ask specific legal questions out of mere curiosity, Conrad. Not after 35 years practicing medicine. What exactly are you worried about?" "Nothing specific," I insisted, forcing a casual laugh. "Just doing some reading late the other night. Reading about complex probate and guardianship law for entertainment. I'm a retired widower, Garrett. I read a great many things these days." He picked up his ball from the cup and started toward the 8th tee box. "Well, if you must know, guardianship in Tennessee requires a formal petition filed directly with the probate court. The petitioner has to prove explicitly that the proposed ward is legally incompetent to manage their own health, daily affairs, or financial estate. A judge reviews the evidence and appoints a guardian only if the case is overwhelmingly made." "What kind of evidence do they look for?" I asked, falling into step beside him. Comprehensive medical records, testimony from close relatives, and most critically, a formal, independent cognitive evaluation conducted by a licensed physician. I nodded slowly, trying to look like a man absorbing useless trivia. And how long does a process like that typically take? Depends on the county and the backlog, Garrett replied, adjusting his cap. But Davidson County can move terrifyingly fast if the petitioner claims immediate financial or physical urgency. 6 weeks, sometimes less, if the paperwork is clean. 6 weeks. Needs to be done before Christmas, Derek had said on the phone. The timeline lined up perfectly. Garrett teed up his ball, took a fluid backswing, and drove it straight down the center of the fairway with the precision of a man who had spent 40 years making split-second consequential judgments from the bench. He lowered his club and glanced back at me, his eyes softening just a fraction. "You want to tell me what this is really about, old friend?" "No," I said flatly. "Fair enough." He passed me my driver from the bag. "But if you ever need real help, Conrad, all you have to do is ask." That evening, I shut myself inside my study and pulled up the official Tennessee Code annotated database, navigating to Title 34. The statute was dense, drafted in that careful, convoluted legal language designed to make plain human matters seem impossibly complicated. I sat under the single lamp for hours, working through it line by agonizing line. Conservators and guardians, petitioner requirements notice to the proposed ward evidentiary standards. And then my eyes landed on the clause I had been dreading. The petitioner must file a comprehensive medical report from a licensed physician certifying the psychological or physical incompetence of the respondent. I read that sentence 3 times to be certain of its meaning. The words didn't change. A licensed physician. The pieces locked together with the devastating clarity of a terminal diagnosis. Stafford Gilmore had come to my home 10 days ago under the pretense of a friendly social call. He had brought his leather briefcase, his professional notebook, and his calculated 40-minute performance. He had asked me what day it was, what month we were in. The name of my granddaughter, watching closely as I deliberately faked confusion and failed every question on cue. He had written it all down with the cold detachment of a man working through a checklist. It had not been a conversation. It was a formal, structured medical evaluation, dressed up as a social visit. He was assembling the mandatory medical report required for a fraudulent court filing. I leaned back heavily in my leather chair, staring up at the dark wooden ceiling beams. The full scope of the conspiracy was now completely clear, each piece interlocking with horrific precision. The unauthorized withdrawals from Mirabelle's account were almost certainly meant to cover Stafford's under-the-table fee. The corrupt physician under investigation for Medicare fraud was providing the required medical signature. The aggressive timeline resolved before Christmas was engineered to catch me off guard during the holidays. My own son wasn't merely skimming a few $1,000s from a forgotten joint account. Derek was actively constructing a legal case to strip me of my personhood, to have me declared incompetent in a court of law. And once an unsuspecting probate judge signed that guardianship order, Derek would assume total unchecked legal control over every remaining aspect of my life, my bank accounts, my medical decisions, my investments, my personal freedom. This house in Brentwood would be transferred immediately into his private trust, exactly as I'd heard him say on the phone. My life savings would follow. I would be reduced to a helpless ward of my own conniving son, legally stripped of the right to direct my own life, my own finances, or my own home, all because a crooked doctor under federal investigation would submit a certified report declaring that Dr. Conrad Aldridge could no longer remember the month of October. My hands rested over the glowing keyboard, fingers trembling slightly. The fraudulent reports had likely already been drafted, possibly even filed with the Davidson County Courthouse. But I knew I couldn't move against them yet. I wouldn't understand the full depth of the betrayal or who else might be involved until I forced Derek to play his hand completely. I needed them to believe their trap was working. I needed to let them think I was entirely powerless right up until the moment I dismantled everything they had built. I never saw it coming. November the 12th. It started the way every morning had started for the past 4 years. Out the door at 6 o'clock, down Concord Road to the walking path that circled the edge of suburban Brentwood. The fog was light that morning, the kind that softened the streetlights without erasing them. A few cars passed heading to early shifts. The air carried the smell of wet leaves and cold pavement. I wore the same reflective vest I always wore, walked the same route I always walked, passed the same houses with the same porch lights still burning. Routine, predictable, safe. I was turning over the guardianship statute in my mind. Section 34, the medical report requirement, the timeline Derek had laid out on the phone. Before Christmas, 6 weeks away. I'd need to move soon, maybe call Garrett again, maybe. The black SUV entered my peripheral vision. I didn't think much of it. Cars used this street as a cut-through to the highway. I kept to the shoulder, gave them room, but the engine sound grew louder, accelerating. I turned my head. Then the impact. The world folded in on itself, sound and sudden pain, as the force lifted me clean off the ground. I hit the shoulder hard, the pavement rising up fast, and everything went white, then dark, then white again. Involuntary impulses firing. The license plate. I needed to hold on to the license plate. I closed my eyes and tried to drag the image back. Black SUV, large tinted windows, Tennessee plates, but the numbers were gone. Sirens grew louder. Red and blue light washed through the fog. Voices multiplied, paramedics, maybe police, I couldn't tell. Nearby, someone was questioning Norma about what she'd witnessed. Her answer came back thin and shaken. She'd been walking behind me, hadn't seen anything, only heard the collision. Hands worked over my body, careful and practiced. The paramedic was young, running his protocols with the kind of efficiency I recognized from decades of watching trauma teams operate. "Sir, your name." "Conrad." The word took effort. "Conrad, I'm going to assess your injuries. Stay as still as you can. Where's the pain?" "Everywhere." He sheared through my jacket. Cold morning air reached my skin before his fingers did probing methodically along my clavicle. I caught him telling his partner comminuted fracture, probable concussion. A cervical collar went around my neck. A backboard slid beneath me. Each small movement detonated fresh pain across my chest. "The plate," I said. "The license plate I have to." "Don't move, sir. You've been struck by a vehicle. We're transporting you to Vanderbilt." The gurney rose. Above me the sky sat gray and without feature. I tried to reconstruct the fragments, dark paint, blacked out windows, no front plate, the state didn't mandate them. The rear plate had given me nothing, neither had my memory. The ambulance doors closed. An IV went in needle sting, then the cold thread of saline moving up my arm. Blood pressure cuff. A pen light swept across each eye with a request I couldn't fulfill. Pupils unequal, I heard. Possible intracranial pressure. The morphine was beginning its slow work, but beneath it, one loop kept running, black car. No brake lights, no deceleration. The rig banked through turns. The siren overhead reached me, warped and far away. The paramedics' questions came at intervals. "What year is it? Who's the president? Do you know what happened to you?" Yes, I knew. A vehicle had struck me from behind. The question was whether that was incidental. I tried to build the sequence back up from pieces. The SUV drifting into my peripheral field. The engine note climbing. Not holding, not tapering climbing. The point of contact arriving from directly behind. Not the side, which meant the driver had full sight of me and every opportunity to correct. No brake lights, no attempt at a swerve. Just the strike and then the diminishing engine note as whoever it was kept going. "Conrad, stay with me, we're close." The license plate wouldn't surface. All I had was a black vehicle, an accelerating engine, and a driver who did not stop. I lay there, wanting to tell the paramedic that no accident had occurred. That someone had studied my schedule, memorized a 4-year-old routine, and acted on it this morning. The words wouldn't organize. And I already knew that when the hospital reached my son with the news that I might not make it, the answer I was about to hear would tell me everything about what my survival was worth to him. "Do you want to know what your life is worth to your own son?" Vanderbilt received me at 7:30. After that memory becomes a reel of disconnected images, fluorescent panels sliding overhead, the sharp antiseptic air of an emergency bay, voices exchanging the compressed shorthand of a trauma team. My remaining clothing came off in pieces. A second IV went in. The clavicle pain had evolved from broad and crushing into something narrow and exquisite, as though the break itself was demanding anatomical attention. Dr. Adrian Holbrook appeared at my gurney, 45 hands that didn't tremble, eyes carrying the composure of someone who had witnessed most of what medicine could offer. She walked me through the situation: surgery, urgency, consent. "We have to operate within the hour. Comminuted clavicle fracture, possible internal involvement. Is there family I can reach?" Derek's number came out of me slurred, thickened by morphine and whatever the trauma had done to my tongue. She moved away to place the call, her voice carried from the left side of the bay, steady and professional. "Mr. Harmon, this is Dr. Adrian Holbrook at Vanderbilt Emergency. Your father was struck by a vehicle this morning. His injuries are serious and he requires surgery within the hour. Can you get here?" Silence from her end while she listened. "A fractured clavicle head injury, possible internal bleeding. We need a family member present to authorize surgery." Longer silence. Then Derek's voice punched through close and clear. She'd put the phone on speaker. "Is he going to die?" We're doing everything possible, but this procedure is critical. I need you here as soon as 4 seconds of nothing. Then, my son's voice level as a sentence he'd rehearsed. He always exaggerates. Call me when it's time to bury him. The call ended. Dr. Holbrook held the phone at her side and stood without moving the way people stand when something has momentarily broken their frame of reference. When she turned to the nurse, her face had been composed back into blankness, but it had taken a visible effort. "No next of kin available," she said, barely above a murmur. "Where does that leave us?" The morphine was winning, pulling me steadily down, not fast enough to take that sentence with it. "Call me when it's time to bury him. My son. My one child. The boy whose bicycle I'd steadied and whose split chin I'd sutured when he went over the handlebars at age 7. Footsteps came from the corridor. A man's voice, unhurried and certain. "All right, show me the papers." I pushed my eyes open. A man filled the doorway, 58, hair going gray at the temples, a charcoal jacket buttoned with the kind of precision that signals deliberate habit. He held himself the way people do when they've spent a career making consequential decisions under pressure. I had no idea who he was. Dr. Holbrook turned. "I'm sorry, who are you?" He produced a folded document from his breast pocket and placed it in her hands. "Emergency medical power of attorney, notarized, the dates are all there." She opened it, read it through, looked up. "This was executed years ago. How did you—" "I'll sign the consent. Show me where." She set the forms in front of him. He went through every line, not skimming, reading the way someone reads a document they intend to be accountable for. Then he signed in 3 places using a pen he'd brought himself. Black ink. Unhurried, deliberate strokes. "Who are you?" Dr. Holbrook asked a second time. The man looked across at me. I tried to hold his face in focus, tried to locate him somewhere in the waterlogged archive of memory the morphine had left me. Nothing rose to the surface. "Someone whose life he saved," he said simply. The operating room doors accepted me and everything became white light and silence. As the doors swung shut behind the gurney, the man in the charcoal jacket reached into his breast pocket, withdrew a small black and white photograph, considered it briefly, and put it away. I surfaced 18 hours later. Pain announced itself first. Not the raw, scattered agony of the roadway, but something deeper and more purposeful, the kind that arrives after a body has been opened and repaired. Chest tube. IV lines threading both arms, monitors ticking out a steady rhythm. My left shoulder sat locked inside a brace that felt like structural steel. 20 pounds minimum. The second thing I noticed was what wasn't there. No sound of visitors, no television, no one shifting in a bedside chair. The room was empty. Windowsill bare. No cards propped against the water pitcher. No son leaning forward with concern arranged across his face, only white walls and the hum of machines fulfilling the duty he had declined. A woman came to the doorway, Winifred Paxley from the billing department 45, with the measured gentleness of someone accustomed to being the bearer of difficult information. She wasn't carrying an invoice. She was carrying a thick white envelope held with both hands as though its contents warranted the care. "Mr. Harmon," her voice was low. "You're awake. How are you feeling?" Like I was hit by a car. A smile moved across her face and didn't reach her eyes. She came to the bedside. "The man who signed your surgical consent, he settled your hospital bill this morning. In full, $94,700, personal credit card, didn't pause." I held her gaze for a moment. "Who was he?" "Wouldn't give his name. Said you'd recognize it when you were ready." She extended the envelope. "He kept watch in the hallway through the night, left sometime before dawn. Asked us to put this in your hands when you woke up." I took it with my good arm. Substantial. Whatever was inside had weight. The front bore one line, blue ink block capitals, unhurried by urgency. "Read when you have enough strength. No rush." Something in the letter form snagged at a distant memory, precise, unhurried, the handwriting of a physician from an era when everything still went down on paper. Winifred paused at the threshold. "No family has phoned. No one's come by. I wanted you to know I'm sorry." "It's fine," I said. She went. I turned the envelope over in my hand, feeling the heft of it. Part of me understood already whatever was sealed inside would not leave things as they were. I wasn't ready for that yet. I placed it on the bedside table and let my eyes close. What I didn't yet know was that someone had been keeping quiet watch over my life for 30 years. A presence tied to an operating room I no longer remembered. There is a particular kind of loyalty that only takes root after a person has looked at your chart and chosen not to walk away. I left the envelope where it sat for 2 days, unopened. Every time a nurse stepped in to check my vitals, I found my eyes drifting toward it. Heavy white paper blue ink, neat block letters. "Read when you have enough strength." I told myself I still needed time to recover. The real reason was more honest than that. I was frightened of what it might confirm. November 14th, 2:30 in the afternoon, my son finally walked through the door. I heard him before I laid eyes on him, his voice carrying down the hallway, pitched loud enough to fill it, warm enough to pass for sincere. The ICU nurse, a woman in her 30s who moved with practiced efficiency, had been updating my chart when she glanced toward the doorway. "Mr. Aldridge," she said quietly, "your son is here." Derek walked in with a bundle of white lilies, his face arranged into a careful expression of concern. Behind him came Petra Dunmore, 40 years old, her eyes carrying a worry that hadn't yet learned to deceive, holding flowers that looked as though they'd been plucked from someone's garden rather than purchased. "Dad," Derek's voice caught just slightly on the word. He set the lilies on the windowsill and came to my bedside. "I came as soon as I could. There was an important meeting in Knoxville and I left my phone in the car. I didn't get the message until yesterday afternoon. I'm so sorry." 2 days. The hospital had reached him 2 days ago and he'd told them to call back when it was time to bury me. I looked at him through the morphine haze and said nothing. Petra stepped forward and placed her flowers alongside his. "We were so worried. How are you feeling?" "Hurts," I managed. "Of course it does." Derek pulled a chair close to the bed, the metal legs scraping across linoleum. "The nurse said you had surgery. Fractured clavicle head trauma. Dad, what happened? Did you fall?" "Car," I said, "hit me." His eyes went wide with practiced shock. "A car struck you during your morning walk?" I gave a small nod. Even that much sent pain radiating through my shoulder. "Did they catch whoever did it?" "Don't know." Derek stood turning toward the ICU nurse who was still working on my chart near the door. His voice dropped, not quite a whisper, but that particular register people use when they want to appear discreet while making certain they're overheard. "Excuse me, could I ask you something?" The nurse looked up. "Of course." He moved closer to her, just past the doorway, but still in my line of sight. I let my eyes fall to slits and watched through my lashes. "Is he showing signs of confusion?" Derek asked. "Memory problems. Our family has been concerned about his mental decline for months. I'm wondering, has Mr. Aldridge been alert and oriented since he regained consciousness?" The nurse replied carefully. "We haven't noted any cognitive, but the accident." His tone shifted, dropping into something conspiratorial, the kind that solicits an alliance. "Could it have been, cognitive decline, walking into traffic without realizing? Have you ever watched someone audition for the role of grieving son while you lie there playing the dying father?" The nurse's answer was professional and cool. "The police report indicates a hit and run. Your father was on the shoulder of the road. The driver fled the scene." Of course. Derek nodded as though she'd just confirmed a suspicion. "It's just that we've been concerned. He lives alone. After our mother passed, we suggested he move closer to us, but he refused. Very independent, sometimes too independent." "I understand. Has he mentioned who's handling his affairs, medical decisions, that sort of thing?" The nurse glanced at her chart. "His surgical consent was signed by someone with medical power of attorney, a Mr. Aysor Saeed or Chancharn." "Really?" Derek's surprise this time sounded genuine. "Who? I don't have that name here. You'd need to check with admissions." Derek returned to my bedside. I kept my breathing slow and even, eyes shut, body still. 35 years of watching patients had taught me how to read a performance. Now I was learning to stage one myself. I felt his hand cover mine, warm, dry. "Dad." Softer now, tender. "Are you awake?" I opened my eyes slowly, the way someone surfaces from deep water. "Derek, I'm here." He squeezed my hand. "Petra and I are here. You just rest. Don't worry about a thing. We'll take care of everything." The weight on that last word was barely there. Most people would have let it pass. I didn't. "The house," he continued. "Your bills, all of it. You just focus on getting better." Petra stood on the other side of the bed, her concern genuine in a way his simply wasn't. She touched my arm gently. "Do you need anything? Are they treating you well?" "Good," I said. "They're good." "We'll be back tomorrow," Derek said, "and the day after. Every day until you're home." "Okay." I looked at my son, really looked at him. Saw the worry etched into his forehead, the deliberate tenderness of how he held my hand, a performance polished enough to take the stage. But beneath it, I saw the arithmetic, the timeline, the guardianship petition almost certainly already filed waiting on medical documentation of my incompetence. Stafford Gilmore's fraudulent report, the memorial account he'd emptied. The phone call 2 days ago telling the hospital to ring back when it was time to bury me. "And now we'll take care of everything." "Thank you, son," I said. Relief passed across his face. Relief that I was conscious, grateful, compliant. that I wasn't asking hard questions or accounting for his 2 days of absence, that I appeared to be exactly the confused old man he required me to be. He smiled and squeezed my hand once more. That's what family is for Dad. My son looked at me for the first time since entering the room, really looked, and I looked back. I showed him precisely what he wanted to see, a worn-out old man, injured and frightened, grateful for his son's belated attention. I didn't let him see what I was actually doing because two could play at this, and I had spent long enough in medicine to know the best diagnosis comes from letting the patient talk. How well do you remember the lives you saved? Derek left at 3:30, promising to return the following day. Petra stayed a moment longer, pressing my hand with real warmth before following him out. The ICU settled into its nighttime rhythm monitors, beeping distant voices at the nurse's station, the mechanical hiss of ventilators from other rooms. I waited until 2 o'clock in the morning. The envelope sat where I'd left it on the bedside table, patient and inevitable. I switched on the small reading lamp clipped to the bed frame and lifted it with my good hand. It had a weight to it, substantial, significant. I tore it open. The first thing that slid out was a photograph, black and white, slightly grainy, the kind security cameras used to produce before everything went digital. The timestamp in the corner read, March 17th, 1993, 0347. I was looking at myself 30 years younger. Surgical scrubs standing in what appeared to be a hospital operating room. My hands raised in that universal posture surgeons adopt after scrubbing in elbows, bent palms, facing each other, fingers spread. Behind me, barely visible on the operating table, was a man. I couldn't make out his face through the tangle of IV lines and monitoring equipment, but I could see blood, a great deal of it. I turned the photo over. Blue ink, the same careful block letters from the envelope. I searched for you for 30 years to say thank you, but today I come not just to thank you. Knoxville. March 1993. I'd been working locum tenens shifts there between my regular practice in Brentwood, picking up extra income to cover Derek's college tuition. That particular night came back to me slowly, like an image developing in a darkroom. A man staggering through the ER doors, around 3 o'clock in the morning, soaked in blood, no identification, no insurance card, barely conscious. The ER had been overwhelmed. The attending had taken one look and started talking about transfers, liability protocols. I'd stepped in and started working, never asked his name, never asked what had happened, just stopped the bleeding, repaired what could be repaired, kept him alive until the real surgeons took over 6 hours later. 30 years. I had put that operation out of my mind, or tried to. Beneath the photograph was a thick dossier, professionally bound, the kind attorneys use for discovery. The first page had Derek's name typed across the top in bold. I opened it. Financial records, bank statements, investment documents, legal filings. Someone had spent serious time and money putting this together. Chestnut Hill Development, $620,000, failed, investors suing. Riverside Commercial Park, $780,000, bankrupt, 3 lawsuits pending. East Nashville Mixed Use, $400,000, foreclosed. Settlement negotiations ongoing, total debt $1,800,000. Settlement deadline March 15, 2024, 4 months from now. I set the dossier onto the hospital tray and looked at my hands. The same hands from that photograph, 30 years older, still steady. My son needed money. Needed it badly. Needed it before March 15th, or 3 separate groups of investors would drag him into court and very likely put him away for fraud. And I had it. The house Mirabelle had left me, the savings, the retirement accounts. Everything he needed sitting in accounts he couldn't touch as long as I remained legally competent to manage my own affairs. I kept reading. The next section was labeled Guardianship Petition, a copy of the actual court filing stamped and dated October 14th, 2023. One day after Stafford Gilmore had sat in my living room asking me what month it was. Clipped behind it was Stafford's psychiatric evaluation. I read it with the clinical detachment of a man who had reviewed thousands of medical reports in his career. The language was professional. The observations were thorough. The conclusions were devastating. Patient demonstrates significant impairment in orientation to time and place. Unable to recall recent events. Confusion regarding family members' names. Rambling speech patterns consistent with moderate cognitive decline. I almost laughed. Would have if my ribs hadn't made that impossible. But fastened to the back of Stafford's report was something else, a document I knew on sight. The Montreal Cognitive Assessment Scoring Sheet. The raw test results before Stafford had shaped them into his narrative. Orientation 6 out of 6. Perfect score. Short-term recall 5 out of 5. Perfect score. Attention 6 out of 6. perfect score. Language 3 out of 3, perfect score. Total 30 out of 30, no cognitive impairment of any kind. Stafford Gilmore had watched me deliberately flunk his disguised assessment, recorded my actual flawless performance, then submitted a report to the court claiming the exact opposite. A physician already under investigation for Medicare fraud had delivered fraudulent medical testimony to strip an elderly man of his legal rights. I turned to the final page. The name there stopped me cold. Petitioner's attorney Dorian Stanwyck, Esquire. I stared at the words until they went soft at the edges. Dorian Stanwyck. March 2008. A Tuesday afternoon. I'd been seeing patients at my Brentwood clinic when a man lurched through the front door, one hand pressed to his chest, face the color of ash, sweat soaking through an expensive suit. Myocardial infarction. Classic presentation. I'd grabbed the defibrillator, started an IV-administered aspirin and nitroglycerin, run 2 rounds of CPR before the ambulance arrived. He'd survived. 6 months later, a thank you card came in the mail, handwritten on heavy stationery, the kind that costs money. He told me I'd saved his life, that he'd never forget it, that if I ever needed anything at all, I should call. 15 years ago, I had saved Dorian Stanwyck's life inside my own clinic. Now he was drafting legal documents to have me declared incompetent, to dissolve my autonomy, to transfer everything I owned into my son's hands, so Derek could settle the debts that would otherwise land him in prison. I set the page down and switched off the reading lamp. The ICU was dark except for the pale glow of monitors. Somewhere down the hall, a ventilator alarm beeped twice and fell quiet. I thought about the photograph, about the man on that operating table in Knoxville, March 1993, about the FBI agent whose name I'd never learned, whose life I'd saved without a moment's deliberation, who had spent 30 years looking for me, and who was somewhere in this hospital right now waiting to tell me exactly how we were going to fight back. Some debts take 30 years to repay. I didn't have to wait long. They moved me from the ICU to a private room on November 16th. The following afternoon, there was a knock at my door. "Come in," I said. The man who entered was 58, salt and pepper hair, gray jacket precisely buttoned. The same man from the photograph 30 years on. The same man who had signed my surgical consent, paid my hospital bill, kept vigil outside the operating room through the night. Garrett Kincaid. He closed the door behind him and stood there a moment, studying me the way I'd studied the photograph at 2 o'clock in the morning. Then he smiled a small, careful smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You read it," he said. "I did, and I don't remember you." I said it honestly. "That operation, Knoxville, 1993. I performed thousands of surgeries across 35 years, I'm sorry." "Don't be." He moved to the chair beside my bed and sat. "I didn't come here expecting you to remember. I didn't come to put you under any obligation. I came to make sure you know the truth about what your son is doing." The dossier made that clear. "Good." He leaned back, hands folded in his lap. "Then you know the timeline. March 15th, 4 months from now. If Derek doesn't cover his debts, 3 separate groups of investors take him to court for fraud. He goes to prison. Unless he gets your assets first." "Unless he gets my assets first," Garrett agreed. "Which is why he's filed for guardianship. Why he brought a fraudulent psychiatrist to your home. Why he's been bleeding your accounts dry for months." I shifted in the bed, careful of the chest tube still draining fluid from my lung. "You said in your note you didn't come just to thank me. So what did you come for?" "To help you fight back." "What?" "Because 30 years ago you saved my life without asking a single question." He paused. "And because for the past 22 years, it's been my job to stop people like your son." "What did you become?" I asked. "After Knoxville, an FBI investigator. 22 years specializing in financial crimes and elder abuse. Retired 3 years ago. Now I work independent cases as a consultant." He smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes. "Your son picked the wrong father to defraud." I looked at the man sitting across from me, 30 years older than that photograph, but the eyes were identical. "Tell me about Knoxville," I said. "Tell me what I don't remember." Garrett was quiet for a moment, selecting his words. "March 1993, I was 14 months into an infiltration assignment. Deep cover embedded with a money laundering organization operating through Knoxville real estate. Someone made me. Shot me twice, right shoulder, left flank." He touched his chest absently, as if the wounds still registered after 3 decades. "The FBI couldn't move in to pull me out. My cover hadn't been cleared. The operation wasn't finished. So I drove myself to Knoxville General Hospital. No identification. A gun still in my jacket, soaked in blood that was mostly mine. I walked through the emergency room doors around 3 o'clock in the morning. 3 doctors took one look and refused to operate. One said I looked like a criminal, another said he wasn't putting his medical license at risk. A nurse called the police. I was going to die on a gurney in a hallway while 6 people stood there arguing about liability and protocol. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. Then you walked in, 39 years old, working a locum tenens shift to cover your son's college tuition. You didn't ask my name, didn't ask what had happened, didn't ask about the gun. You just looked at me, looked at the other doctors, and said, I'll take him. I don't remember that, I said again. 30 years ago, I had walked into that operating room because it was what needed doing. No calculation, no weighing of outcomes, just action. 4-hour surgery, Garrett continued. You took out 2 bullets, repaired a punctured lung, stopped internal bleeding that should have killed me an hour before I reached the hospital. By the time the FBI showed up 6 hours later with proper credentials, you'd already brought me back. He reached into his jacket and produced the black and white photograph I'd found in the envelope. He looked at it briefly, then placed it on my bedside table. I spent the next 30 years trying to find you. Knoxville General had no record of you working locum tenens shifts there. They'd purged those files after a few years. The operation fell during a shift change, minimal documentation. It wasn't until 2016 that I finally traced you to Brentwood, Tennessee. And then I watched, made sure you were all right. Set up the medical power of attorney in case you ever needed it. Kept track of your son from a distance. Saw the failed investments, the accumulating debt, early warning signs of someone desperate enough to do something unforgivable. The hit and run, I said. I think your son needs you to appear incompetent or dead before March 15th. I think the psychiatric evaluation was plan A. I think the accident may have been plan B. His voice hardened. I'm still investigating, but either way, we need to move fast. I looked down at my hands, the same hands in that 1993 photograph, 30 years older, still steady. Garrett said quietly, 30 years ago, you saved my life without hesitation. You walked into that operating room because someone needed help and you were the only one willing to provide it. You didn't ask what I'd done, didn't ask if I deserved it, you just did what was right. He stood and straightened his gray jacket. Today it's my turn. Today it's my turn to save you from your own son. And the next morning we would begin planning exactly how to do that. The best way to dismantle a conspiracy is to map it the way you'd map a diagnosis. Garrett returned the following morning at 8 o'clock, laptop bag over his shoulder, coffee in each hand. He passed one to me, black, no sugar, exactly the way I'd been drinking it for 40 years, and rolled the table across my bed. Ready to work, he asked. Yes. The laptop swung open and the screen faced me. A color-coded spreadsheet filled it, every column labeled, every row sorted by type. The architecture was familiar, the same kind of systematic thinking I'd applied to patient records across 35 years of practice. Here's where we stand, Garrett said, moving between tabs. Derek's finances, 3 development deals collapsed inside 4 years, total exposure close to $2 million with 3 separate investor groups already in litigation. March 15th is the wall, 4 months. He brought up scanned pages, one after another, court filings, demand letters, balance sheets. Airtight, brutal. Then there's the sequence of events. He clicked again. October 14th, guardianship petition lands at Davidson County Probate Court, one day after Stafford Gilmore sat in your living room running that disguised cognitive test. That gap isn't accidental, I said. It's a schedule. They coordinated it. Another tab appeared. Stafford Gilmore, licensed in Tennessee, currently under state medical board review for Medicare billing fraud license, suspended while the investigation runs. Legally, he cannot practice medicine. That means every word of the psychiatric report he filed about you is built on nothing. Does Derek know Stafford's license is suspended? Almost certainly not. Stafford would have walked in looking entirely legitimate. Your son required a clinical report to anchor the petition. Stafford required cash. Each one had what the other needed. Garrett pulled up a 4th tab, the petition itself, every page visible. Which brings us to Dorian Stanwyck's filings. The lawyer who assembled all of this is the man who was dying in your clinic 15 years ago. I studied Dorian's name on the screen and let the irony pass through me without landing. Sentiment was a currency I couldn't spend right now. So what are we missing? I asked. Garrett's mouth curved slightly. That's the right question. 3 things. First, hard proof that the signature authorizing withdrawals on your joint account was forged. Your testimony alone doesn't beat a bank ledger. We need a forensic document examiner, someone whose findings hold up in court. What's second? Character witnesses. People who can stand up and swear under oath that you are fully competent to run your own life. Not friends saying nice things, credible voices. Professionals, neighbors, anyone with regular contact and standing. 35 years of diagnosing had trained me to look for what was already there, not what I wished were there. Barnett Calloway, I said. We've shared a golf cart at Brentwood Golf Club for the better part of 20 years. retired Tennessee Circuit Court judge. Garrett's eyebrows lifted. A sitting judge, retired, but yes, he's already aware something's off. I raised the topic of guardianship law with him a few weeks back. Good. Who else? My neighbors on Concord Road, former patients. The staff at the club. I keep a routine. People notice me. I'm not invisible. Garrett wrote steadily on a yellow legal pad. Sworn affidavits from as many as we can gather. Volume matters. You said 3 things. The third? He set the pen down. Captured evidence of the conspiracy itself, something that documents intent rather than just outcome. Derek on record discussing what he's doing. Stafford Gilmore acknowledging the evaluation was fiction. Dorian Stanwyck confronted with the conflict of interest he buried. Without that, a clever defense attorney turns all of this into a son who was worried about his elderly father and a doctor who made a professional judgment call. And how do we put that on record? We give them room to speak, and we make sure a recorder is running when they do. The implication was clear. You want me wired. Eventually, before that you keep performing. The grateful father, the confused old man who suspects nothing. Right now, Derek believes he has complete control of the situation. That belief is the most valuable thing we have. I watched Garrett work through the evidence cross-referencing tabs with the precision of someone who had dismantled fraud operations for most of his career, and it settled on me cleanly I wasn't in this alone anymore. When I'm discharged, I said Derek will push for me to recuperate at his place. Count on it, Garrett said, and you should go. You want me inside his house. I want you somewhere you can listen. Overhear calls. Watch the behavior up close and confirm what we're already building a case around. He shut the laptop. His eyes held mine. But the moment he senses you know it's over and it gets dangerous. Understood. A quiet settled between us. Nashville traffic drifted in faintly through the window glass. The monitors kept their rhythm. Garrett reached into his bag and produced something small enough to sit in the center of my palm flat, dark the size of a coat button. Voice activated. Sits in your breast pocket. Feeds to a receiver I'll keep within 100 yards. We'll work out a schedule before you use it, but not yet. He closed my fingers around it. Heal first. Get clear of this building. Re-establish your normal patterns. How tight is the clock? March 15th doesn't move. Between now and then, Derek has to either cover his debt or seize your assets to do it. The guardianship petition is the seizing mechanism. A judge signs the order and Derek walks away with control of everything you own. And if the petition fails, then he improvises, which may already be happening. Garrett shouldered his bag and pushed to his feet. He paused at the chair, one hand on the back. One last thing. November 12th, the morning you were struck. Traffic camera footage 4 blocks from the scene picked up a partial plate on a black SUV. Something tightened behind my sternum. We're running the plate now. Results should come back within 48 hours. You're telling me it might not have been random. His face gave nothing away. I'm telling you the evidence isn't complete yet, but you deserve to know it exists. He left. I sat there with the closed laptop in front of me, turning the same thought over in my mind. Black SUVs, partial plates, and a son with a deadline of March 15th, and a father who was worth more to him dead. And when the registration came back linked to Derek's real estate brokerage, I would have to decide which category of crime I was actually dealing with. Sometimes the people you love most become the evidence you need. The plate results came back 48 hours later. But before I learned what they showed, Derek made his 3rd visit to the hospital. November 20th, mid-afternoon. He came through the door carrying a box of chocolates and someone I hadn't seen for months beside him. Calla Aldridge, 19, with Mirabelle's worried eyes and nothing of her father's careful calculation. She was across the room and had her arms around me before I could speak. The embrace avoided my shoulder brace but held on with a ferocity that pressed against my ribs in a different way entirely. "Grandpa," she said against my good shoulder. "I was so scared when Mom told me." "I'm okay, sweetheart." She eased back, palms still resting on my arms, studying my face. "You don't look okay. You look like you got hit by a truck." "Close enough," I said. Derek filled the doorway behind her. The chocolates in one hand, the measured expression of concern arranged across his face. Petra stood slightly back, and her worry, unlike his, was the kind that doesn't rehearse. "We brought your favorite," Derek said, placing the box on the bedside table. "Milk chocolate with roasted almonds, remember?" I remembered. From 20 years ago when he'd learned those things because he loved me, rather than because he needed to deploy them. "Thank you." He drew up a chair. "Dad, I've been going over your discharge situation. Heading back to that house by yourself isn't realistic, not with a fractured clavicle and head trauma. The right move is to come stay with us in Nashville. Temporary, just until you're back on your feet. I'll manage fine in Brentwood. Who's going to handle meals? Get you to your follow-up visits?" He tilted forward, the furrow in his brow precisely calibrated. "We have more than enough room. Cala's suite has its own bath she can shift to the guest room without any trouble. I don't want to impose, I said, playing exactly the part he'd written for me. You're not an imposition, you're my father. Cala settled onto the edge of the mattress and laced her fingers through mine. Her grip was steady open with no trace of awareness of the theater playing out around her. Derek's phone lit up. He checked it rose immediately. I have to take this work. Back in a minute. He moved into the hallway and pulled the door nearly shut. Petra drifted toward the window, leaving the space to us. My granddaughter lowered her voice. Grandpa, I'm worried about you. I'm fine, sweetheart. Truly. No, I mean... She cut a glance toward the door. Dad's been on the phone a lot lately. Late at night in his office. The wall between our rooms is thin. I kept everything in my voice level. What kind of conversations? I can't make out the words, but the way he sounds... She shook her head. It doesn't sound like him. It sounds like someone I don't recognize. I held my granddaughter's hand and thought she has no idea that one day soon she'll have to choose between her father and the truth. It's probably just pressure from work, I said quietly. Try not to let it sit with you. She nodded, but her eyes didn't agree. Derek reappeared 5 minutes later wearing his easy smile, and the three of us made light conversation until they said their goodbyes and left. 2 days after that, November the 22nd, I went home. The Brentwood house received me in silence. Something about it felt altered, though I couldn't be certain whether it was the house or me. Before we go any further, what I was about to learn about what my own son had been doing in the dark and how deep it truly went is not something I could have prepared myself for. Tell me, if you discovered that someone close to you had been quietly working against you, would you confront them face to face, or would you let the evidence do the talking? I moved through familiar rooms slowly, my left arm locked in its brace, every breath drawing a pull of discomfort from my ribs. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it. Mirabelle's photographs on the mantel, my medical texts on the shelves, the same coffee maker I'd run for 20 years. But the rooms felt like props arranged for a production I no longer had a part in. I'd been home less than an hour when Garrett knocked. I let him in. He was carrying a manila folder, and his face told me everything before a word passed between us. The SUV, he said, no preamble. Black Ford Explorer, rented from Enterprise on November 10th, 2 days before you were struck. We moved to my study. I lowered myself into the leather chair Mirabelle had given me for our 30th anniversary. Garrett stayed on his feet. Rented through your son's real estate brokerage, he went on. Company credit card. The name on the agreement is someone I don't recognize, an employee or a contractor most likely, but the contact email on the rental paperwork is your son's personal address. For the first time since any of this had started, my hands were unsteady. You're certain? I've run it 3 times. Garrett opened the folder and placed a printed receipt in front of me. Derek's email address right there, unmistakable. This shifts the case. Civil fraud becomes intentional assault with a deadly weapon. We have decisions to make. What are the options? Take it to the police right now. Let a criminal investigation run. Press charges. Or hold it in reserve, use it as leverage. The guardianship hearing comes first, and that's civil court lower burden of proof. We tear apart the petition, prove the fraud, get the judge to throw it out. Then if it comes to that, we bring the criminal evidence forward. I looked down at the rental receipt, my son's email in black ink. I thought about the black SUV coming up behind me on a November morning, the impact, the crack of my clavicle, my skull meeting the pavement. Thought about Cala whispering through a hospital door. His voice sounds scary. Hold it back, I said. The court comes first. We keep the leverage. Garrett nodded. He understood. He left 20 minutes later. I sat alone in the study as the afternoon light drained from the windows. After a while, I stood and walked to the wall where a family photograph had hung for 10 years, all of us smiling, taken back when my son needed my presence more than my estate. Mirabelle's arm was around Derek's shoulders. Cala was 9 in that picture, gap-toothed and grinning. Petra stood beside me and I had my hand on Derek's back. We looked like what we were supposed to be. I took the frame down and put it in a drawer face down. The man I had raised had been replaced by someone willing to use a rental car and a forged signature to solve his problems. How many ways can a legal case collapse before it ever reaches the courtroom? 2 days after I put that photograph in the drawer, I drove to Barnett Calloway's house. November the 24th, mid-afternoon. Maneuvering with the shoulder brace was awkward but manageable. Brentwood to Brentwood, a 10-minute drive along roads I'd traveled for 35 years. Barnett lived in a modest colonial on Flagstone Drive, the kind of house a retired judge accumulates through a government pension and a lifetime of careful habits. He answered the door in reading glasses and a cardigan, a coffee mug in one hand. Conrad, come in. I followed him to his study, a room that had absorbed 40 years of the law shelves of case reporters, framed bar certifications, photographs of colleagues and courtrooms. He waved me toward the leather chair across from his desk. Coffee. No, thank you. I set Garrett's dossier on the desk, thick-tabbed by section, organized the way evidence needs to be when lives are riding on it. Barnett looked at it, then at me. What's this? Read it, I said. He settled back open to the first page and began. I watched him the way I used to watch surgical residents, tracking not the speed, but the focus, looking for the moment when the critical detail registered. 3 minutes of silence. He turned pages steadily. Financial records, the timeline, court filings, Stafford Gilmore's evaluation set against the actual test scores, the rental car receipt, Dorian Stanwyck's name on the petition. When he reached the final page, he set the folder down and removed his glasses. Your son is trying to have you declared incompetent, he said, not a question. Yes, using a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation. Yes. Barnett leaned back, fingers pressed together. Do you want my professional read? That's why I'm here. Your son is playing what looks like a strong hand, but he was beaten on paper before any of this began. Something in my chest eased for the first time in weeks. Barnett opened the folder again and turned to the psychiatric report. Fatal flaw number 1, Stafford Gilmore's evaluation. Even setting aside his suspended license, which alone makes the report legally void, this document doesn't meet DSM-5 diagnostic standards. Any independent psychiatrist dismantles it in 5 minutes. And the Montreal Cognitive Assessment results you're showing me, perfect score. 30 out of 30. 0 impairment. Gilmore documented your actual performance and then wrote the opposite in his formal report. He turned to another section. Fatal flaw number 2, the bank authorization signature. If that signature is forged, this is no longer just a civil matter. Criminal forgery. Identity theft. Your son didn't only try to drain your accounts, he manufactured documents in your name. Another page. Fatal flaw number 3, submitting fabricated materials to the court. Fraud upon the court is among the gravest offenses in the legal system. If you can establish that psychiatric report is invented, your son and his attorney have exposed themselves to sanctions, potential disbarment, and criminal prosecution. He looked up from the last page, and for the first time since I'd arrived, he smiled. And fatal flaw number 4, Dorian Stanwyck. I know Dorian, capable lawyer, or he was, but Tennessee Rules of Professional Conduct Rule 3.3 couldn't be clearer. A lawyer shall not knowingly make a false statement of fact or law to a tribunal. If Dorian filed this petition knowing the psychiatric report was fabricated and the financial records were forged, he's violated the bedrock of legal ethics. Barnett closed the folder. Conrad, I sat on that bench for 20 years. I've watched hundreds of guardianship cases come through. This one is dead on arrival. The only open question is how severely your son and his co-conspirators get hurt when it unravels. What do I need to do? First, retain a good independent attorney. Not me, I'm retired and I'm your friend, which creates complications. But I have someone in mind. She's precise, she works in probate litigation, and cases like this don't slip through her hands. All right. Second, file a counter motion. Contest the petition. Demand an independent evaluation from a court-appointed psychiatrist. Request forensic analysis of that bank signature. Push for full discovery, every document, every email, every phone record your son has touched. I filed it all away in the way I used to catalog symptoms in the early years of residency. Third, and this is the piece that matters most, you need living witnesses to your mental capacity. People who can take the stand and swear you are just as sharp today as you were 5 years ago. Neighbors, former colleagues, the Brentwood Golf Club staff. Anyone who sees you regularly and can testify under oath. Barnett reached for his phone, then paused. But there's something beyond what any lawyer can manufacture a human story. The judge who hears this case needs to see you as a person, not a legal file. A retired physician, a widower, a grandfather, someone who spent 35 years keeping people alive and who deserves something better than being stripped of his rights by his own son. He set the phone down and met my eyes. How many people can stand up for you? How many do you have? I turned it over for a moment. The hardware store owner who'd known me for 20 years. The woman at the diner who poured my coffee every Wednesday. The nurses at Brentwood Medical Center who still called me Dr. Aldridge. The golf club staff, my neighbor's former patients, Barnett and now Garrett. I counted. Enough, I said. Barnett lifted his phone. Good, because while we're assembling your defense, I suspect your FBI friend is already building the prosecution. And he was right. While I sat counting allies in Barnett's study, Garrett was already making contact with someone I had placed on the wrong side of this, my daughter-in-law, Petra, who had no idea she had been lending her name to fraud. How do you tell someone they've been signing their own complicity without knowing it? November the 26th. Garrett called me that evening to walk me through what had happened. I wasn't there. but he laid out every detail with the economy of someone who had run 1,000 interviews. He'd chosen a neutral cafe in Nashville, well outside Derek's usual territory, somewhere Petra wouldn't fear being noticed. She'd agreed to meet after he introduced himself as a financial consultant who needed to discuss her husband's business dealings. She arrived 10 minutes early. Garrett told me ordered coffee took the window seat where the afternoon light fell across her face and made her look younger than 40, more uncertain than I'd ever seen her at the hospital. Garrett sat down across from her without any preamble. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. Petra's hands were wrapped around her cup. "You said this was about my husband's business. Is something wrong?" "That depends." He placed a manila folder on the table between them. "How much do you know about his financial position?" "Enough. He's in commercial real estate. Development projects. He's doing well." "Is he—" Garrett opened the folder. The same documents I had studied 2 weeks earlier, financial records, court filings, debt summaries. He slid the top page across. Petra looked down at it, her face drained. This can't be right." "3 failed development projects across 4 years, Garrett said quietly. "Total debt approaching $2 million. 3 separate investor groups have filed suit. Settlement deadline is March 15th. "No?" Her voice had gone to almost nothing. "He told me everything was fine. He said business was strong. We just bought Kala a new car last month. How could—" She stopped. Her eyes came up to meet his. "Who are you?" "Someone trying to help." "Help who?" "You and your father-in-law." I can imagine the exact moment her world shifted the instant the husband she trusted became a stranger wearing a familiar face. Petra pushed the page back across the table as though it had burned her. "I don't understand. If any of this is true, why wouldn't he tell me? Why would he lie?" "Because he needed you to keep signing documents without stopping to ask questions." Her hands went still against the cup. "What documents?" "That's what I need to find out." Garrett leaned in. "Over the past 6 months, what has your husband put in front of you to sign?" She paused, thinking. "Routine things. Business paperwork, family finances. He handles most of it. I just sign where he points." "Do you read them first?" The silence that followed was long enough to be its own answer. "Do you keep copies?" Garrett asked. "Sometimes. I take photos in case I need them later." "Can I see them?" Petra pulled out her phone with unsteady hands and began scrolling through her photo library. Garrett told me he watched her expression shift as she moved through the images, confusion curling into something much darker. "There are so many," she whispered. "I didn't realize there were so many." "Do you know what they say? Some of them business loans, account authorizations, property transfers." "Property transfers." Garrett let the words sit a moment, then said, "Whose property?" Petra kept scrolling. Her hand stopped. "This one," she said. "From 2 weeks ago. Derek said it was routine estate planning for his father in case anything happened." She turned the phone toward him. "He told me he recognized it immediately. The same authorization form the bank had on file, the one that had added Derek's name to Mirabelle's memorial account." "Did you read this before you signed it?" "He said it was standard paperwork. He was in a hurry. I trusted him." Her voice cracked on that last word. Garrett reached across and gently took the phone from her, scrolled through a few more images. He found another document, then another. "Petra," he said carefully, "do you know what these actually authorize?" "Estate planning. Financial management in case Conrad needs help. They authorize your husband to sell portions of your father-in-law's estate, to liquidate assets, to move property into trusts he controls." She stared at him. "No, that's not. He wouldn't. Without your father-in-law's knowledge, without his consent." Petra stood abruptly. Her chair scraped back hard against the floor. Other patrons at nearby tables looked over. "I need to go," she said. "I need to go home." She reached for her purse. Garrett rose too slowly, deliberately. "Before you leave, sir," he said, "one more question. Did you know that you signed an authorization to sell a portion of your father-in-law's estate?" She stopped, turned back. Her face had gone white. "What did I sign?" Barely a whisper. Garrett reached into the folder and laid a copy of one of the authorization pages on the table. Petra stared at it, at her own signature at the bottom, at the legal language she had never read, at the date October 20th, 3 weeks before I'd been hit by that black SUV. Garrett told me she stood there for a full minute, phone in one hand, purse in the other, looking at her own name in blue ink on a document that had authorized fraud she hadn't known existed. And when she finally looked up at him, she understood she would have to choose protect her husband or protect herself. Sometimes children protect you in ways they don't fully understand. Petra made her choice 2 days later. She called Garrett and told him everything she knew. But before that conversation happened, before she decided to step across to the witness side of this, my granddaughter handed me something worth more than any sworn testimony. November 28th, Thanksgiving. I'd kept the gathering small, just Derek, Petra, and Kala. A careful dinner at my Brentwood house, everyone maintaining their roles. Derek asked about my recovery. I told him I was healing, but slowly. Petra watched the two of us with eyes that now held far too much knowledge, and Calla sat quiet, pushing food around her plate, looking like someone who had words she couldn't bring herself to say. After dinner, while Derek and Petra cleaned up in the kitchen, Calla followed me out to the porch. The November air was cold enough to show our breath. I settled into my usual wooden rocking chair. She took the seat beside me. "Grandpa," she said quietly. "That day at the hospital, when I told you Dad's voice sounded strange." She paused. "I recorded it." I turned toward her. "You recorded it?" "Not on purpose. I mean..." She reached into her jacket pocket and produced an old phone. "This is my old one. I keep it in my bedroom drawer. That night when I heard Dad talking, I got scared. I grabbed it and opened the voice memo app because I wanted to, I don't know, remember to tell Mom later. But then I forgot about it." She held the phone out to me. The screen showed a single voice memo file, November 17th, 2023, duration 8 minutes, 3 seconds. "Have you listened to it?" I asked. "No, I just know Dad's voice is in it and someone else's. They were talking about you." I held that old phone in my hands and understood this 19-year-old girl had no idea she'd just placed the weapon that would destroy her father directly into my keeping. "Can I hold on to this, sweetheart?" She nodded. "Are you scared, Grandpa?" "No," I said. "I'm just worried about you." She leaned over and hugged me gently, careful of my shoulder. When she eased back, her eyes were bright with tears. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." She went back inside. I stayed on the porch for another 10 minutes, turning that small phone over in my hands, feeling the weight of what it contained. Derek and his family left at 8 o'clock. I waited until their headlights had cleared the driveway, then sent Garrett a text. He arrived 20 minutes later. We sat in my study, the desk lamp throwing long shadows across the room. I handed him Calla's phone without any explanation. He looked at the screen, saw the voice memo, and grasped it at once. "You haven't listened yet," he said. "No, do you want to?" I nodded. Garrett pressed play. For the first few seconds, there was only ambient sound. Footsteps, a door pulling shut, the muffled quality you get from a phone tucked inside a drawer. Then voices came through, sharp and recognizable. Derek's voice. I would know it anywhere. Hearing it cold, deliberate, methodical, dismantled whatever remained of the hope I had been carrying. He was speaking with Stafford Gilmore, walking through each step of the plan to strip me of my rights before the holidays, discussing me the way you'd discuss an asset to be liquidated rather than a father. They covered the fabricated cognitive reports, the unauthorized withdrawals from Mirabelle's memorial account, the precise coordination of the court filings. Every word was confirmation, clinical, total, absolute. That's the priority, the house first, then the investment accounts. I set my coffee cup down. The sound was sharper than I intended. Garrett paused the recording and looked at me. "Are you okay?" I kept my eyes on the phone lying on the desk between us. 8 minutes and 3 seconds. My son's voice captured by accident on an old phone by a granddaughter too frightened to sleep, laying out the plan to dismantle everything I had spent 35 years building. The Brentwood house. I'd bought the land in 1984. Mirabelle and I had designed it together, every room, every window, every detail shaped around the life we meant to live. I'd worked double shifts at the clinic to pay for it. We'd moved in the spring of 1985, 3 months before Derek's 12th birthday. Mirabelle's roses still lined the front walk. The porch I'd hammered together board by board, that was where we'd spent our evenings for 32 years, right up until the night I lost her. That house held everything a son raised to manhood, holidays stacked one on top of another, storms endured and survived, two people growing gray together. And now that son's voice was coming through a speaker saying, "Once the court approves, I'll transfer the Brentwood house into the trust immediately. Not my assets, not my property." The Brentwood house. He'd named it, singled it out. The home I'd built around the woman I'd loved for 43 years. I asked how much more is on this recording. Garrett checked the timer. 6 more minutes. He hit play. Derek's voice picked back up, laying out the timeline, the settlement deadline, the investors lined up and waiting. Stafford had asked about risk. Derek waved it off. They went through Dorian Stanwyck's legal approach, noted that Petra had been signing papers without reading a word of them, and laughed at how smoothly the whole thing had gone. 8 minutes and 3 seconds of my son methodically taking apart everything I'd built, cool and efficient as a man working through a checklist. When the recording stopped, the only sound in the study was the clock Mirabelle had given me for our 30th anniversary still ticking away in the corner. Garrett asked how I was holding up. I met his eyes across the desk. Calla's old phone lay between us, the audio still loaded on the screen. One line wouldn't leave me alone. Transfer the Brentwood house immediately. That house, I built it for my wife in 1985. By the next morning, I would be standing in Stafford Gilmore's office, and he would understand precisely what it costs a fraudulent psychiatrist to lend his name to a scheme like this. I entered Stafford Gilmore's office the way I used to step into an operating room, deliberate, unapologetic, ready. December 1st, 9 o'clock in the morning. The clinic was on the third floor of a medical building in Nashville. Modest space kept professional. His receptionist moved to intercept me. I told her I'd wait, and I sat down in the lobby with 2 manila folders across my knees. 20 minutes passed. Then Stafford came out of an exam room, registered my face, and stopped moving altogether. "Dr. Aldridge," he said, not Conrad, not Mr. "Doctor, we need to talk." He flicked a glance at the receptionist, then back to me. "I have a full schedule. It won't take long." He brought me to his private office, small desk credentials framed on the wall shelves of reference texts that had the look of furniture rather than tools. He settled into his chair. I took the one across from him and laid both folders on the surface between us. "What can I do for you?" Measured, controlled. "I've been a physician for 35 years, I said. "So let's talk the way 2 doctors talk." I opened the first folder. Inside was his cognitive evaluation, the one filed with Davidson County Probate Court. I pushed it across to him. "You're aware that the 4 test scores recorded here fall short of what DSM-5 requires to support any diagnosis of cognitive impairment, aren't you?" He looked at it without picking it up. The evaluation was comprehensive. The Montreal Cognitive Assessment, I scored a perfect 30 out of 30. No impairment of any kind. You recorded what I actually did, and then you wrote something entirely different in your official report. Silence stretched between us. I opened the second folder. Tennessee Medical Board printouts, news coverage, investigation summaries. Slid the whole lot across to sit beside the first. Medicare fraud, Davidson County 2022. Your license is suspended pending review. The color left Stafford's face. "And," I continued, "filing a fabricated medical evaluation with a court while operating under a suspended license, that's the end of your career, permanently." He went very still. "What is it you want?" "Pull the report before December 5th. File a retraction with the Tennessee Medical Board. State that your clinical judgment was in error and that further review finds no cognitive impairment warranting guardianship. 35 years of diagnosing what was killing people. Stafford Gilmore was just one more infection with a name and a desk. Refuse, and I deliver this entire package to the Tennessee Medical Board, the Davidson County District Attorney, and the probate court judge. You lose everything." He stared at the 2 folders, then at me. "Your son isn't your problem to solve anymore." A long silence. Then quietly, "You're handing me a way out." "I'm handing you a decision. Your patients think well of you. I read the reviews. People rely on you, but you took money from the wrong man to sign off on a lie." I got to my feet. "December 5th is the deadline. Past that, it's out of my hands." I left him there alone with the paperwork cataloging what he'd done. December 3rd, 2 days on, Petra appeared at my door. Alone. No Derek beside her, no Calla trailing behind. Just Petra gripping a manila envelope, her face carrying the hollowness of someone who hadn't closed her eyes in days. "Can I come in?" I brought her inside the Brentwood house. We sat in the living room, the same room where Stafford had run his fraudulent evaluation 2 months before. She placed the envelope on the coffee table and folded her hands. 7 documents, she said. I put my name on them across the past 6 months. Derek said they were ordinary family paperwork, estate planning done for your sake. She drew the pages out and laid them flat. I knew 3 of them on site, asset transfer instruments built to funnel pieces of my estate into trusts that Derek held. Each one would spring to life the instant a court signed off on guardianship. Her signature anchored the bottom of every page. "I didn't know," her voice cracked. "I swear to you, I had no idea what I was actually signing." "I believe you. He told you it was routine, that you were just there as a witness." She held my gaze with eyes that had finally come open. "What do I do?" I thought about Calla pressing that old phone into my hands 8 minutes and 3 seconds of her own father. About what it means for children to be ground up in the gears their parents set turning. 2 choices, I told her. "And I'll be with you no matter which one you take. Tell me. You can work with my legal team. Testify that you signed those pages without knowing their true purpose. Hand over what you have. Help us demonstrate the fraud your husband constructed. That's one. The other, you protect Derek. Stand with your husband and decline to cooperate. I'm not going to force your hand." Petra lifted one of the sheets and studied the signature that bore her name. "But," I said, keeping my voice low. My granddaughter deserves at least one grown adult on the right side of this. She set it back down and gave a single nod. She never said the words aloud, but I didn't need her to. December 5th brought the court notice. Davidson County Probate Court guardianship petition hearing set for January 8th, 2024. Garrett arrived at the Brentwood house that afternoon, laptop open, and walked me through the formal opposition he'd submitted that morning. The attached exhibits told the full story transcript of the audio from Calla's phone, Stafford Gilmore's Medicare fraud investigation file, bank records tracing the unauthorized withdrawals, a complete debt dossier accounting for every collapsed investment, every lawsuit, every dollar Derek had been counting on taking from me to keep himself from going under. Stafford pulled his report this morning, Garrett said. Retraction filed with the court and the medical board. Good. How far out is the hearing? He pulled up a calendar. 34 days. Derek will hear about this within a few days, Garrett said. Once he does, the pace of everything changes. My mind went to the black SUV, to the rental contract, with Derek's email in the field, to a man cornered enough to build a fraud and maybe cornered enough to reach for something worse. Or dangerous in a different way, I said. Garrett shut the laptop and fixed me with the look of a man who has watched desperation do its worst work. Both, he said, and I was right. 10 days later, Christmas Day, Derek would have me over to his Nashville house. 14 family members assembled, one last scene to perform, not yet knowing I'd stopped playing my part. What do you call it when the people whose lives you once saved turn around and save yours? The first real acceleration happened 5 days after the court notice came. December 10th, Garrett placed a call to Dorian Stanwyck, under 3 minutes, start to finish. I wasn't in the room, but Garrett laid out every word afterward. Mr. Stanwyck, my name is Garrett Kincaid. I represent Conrad Aldridge in the guardianship proceeding you filed on Derek Aldridge's behalf. A beat of silence. Then Dorian's voice guarded, I know who you are. Then you already understand that I have evidence showing you were aware the psychiatric evaluation attached to that petition had no legal foundation. You've practiced elder law for 20 years. You knew Stafford Gilmore's license was suspended. You knew the test scores couldn't sustain the diagnosis. Filing that petition anyway is fraud upon the court under Tennessee law. Nothing from the other end. There's one more thing I know, Garrett went on. You have a heart surgery scar dating to March 2008, a myocardial infarction. You stumbled into a clinic in Brentwood, Tennessee with your hand pressed to your chest. A physician stabilized you right there before the paramedics arrived, kept you alive. A longer silence this time. I know exactly which doctor that was, Garrett said. So do you really want to go on representing the son who's working to ruin him? Dorian Stanwyck was off the case within 24 hours. Dorian cited a conflict of interest, gave Derek nothing beyond what professional ethics required him to say. One former patient turned adversary. The circle closed itself neatly. Derek scrambled, made a dozen calls, eventually found someone willing to take the case with less than a month on the clock. I never caught the new attorney's name. It was beside the point. The tide had shifted so decisively in our favor by then that no lawyer alive could have rescued my son's conspiracy. 15 days later, I walked through his front door carrying the same clinical composure that had just stripped him of his counsel. December 25th, Christmas evening. Derek's Nashville house wore its decorations like a costume, white lights on the tree, tasteful wreaths, expensive wine poured into the right glasses. 14 relatives filled the living room. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't laid eyes on in years, all unwittingly recruited as an audience for a performance that was never going to unfold the way Derek intended. Garrett had briefed me on the plan. A relaxed family gathering, innocent-sounding questions, arranged to make me stumble relatives who could later swear that Grandpa Conrad seemed foggy, off his game, not quite the man they remembered. I came ready. Derek met me at the door with his well-rehearsed grin. "Dad, Merry Christmas! Come in, come in!" The living room was warm and noisy, crowded with decades of shared history. Derek's cousins, Mirabelle's sister, the extended family that shows up for holidays and weddings and funerals. They all turned when I entered, called out, "Merry Christmas," embraced me gently around my healing shoulder. Derek waited until everyone had settled with plates and drinks. Then he began. "Dad," he said, pitching his voice to Carrie, "do you remember what year we moved to Eugene? Around Thanksgiving, wasn't it?" The room went quiet. Every face turned to watch whether the old man could pull it up. I looked at my son and smiled. 1987. March 14th, spring. Not Thanksgiving. You were 7 years old. Your mother and I drove that moving truck ourselves because we didn't have money for movers. You cried the entire first night because you missed your old room." Someone laughed. The tension dissolved. Derek tried again 10 minutes later. "Dad, you remember my cousin Clifton, right? Or is it Richard?" "Clifton," I said. "Clifton Draper. Married to Lynette. 3 kids, Bryn is 12, Colby is 9, and the youngest just turned 6 in October. Wren." Clifton raised his glass. "That's right. Better recall than mine." Derek's third attempt came with dessert. A fishing trip we'd supposedly taken when he was 15, details deliberately scrambled, dates shuffled, constructed so that any effort on my part to correct them would read as confusion. I let him finish his version. Then I told the real one. Exact dates. The names of everyone who'd been there. What species we pulled out of the water. The name of the lake. What the weather did that weekend. Mirabelle's sister leaned toward Derek and murmured, not quite softly enough, "He's sharper than I am." The evening kept going. Dinner, gifts, conversations circling through the rooms. I fielded every question with the same precision I'd once applied to a differential diagnosis. Named every person, placed every date, recalled every detail. Pulled medical stories from 35 years of practice and delivered them with exact timestamps and outcomes attached. By the time coats started coming off hooks, I had made it impossible for Derek to manufacture a single credible witness to my decline. The last guest left at 9:30. Derek walked them out, thanked them, wished them safe travels home, then pushed the door shut and turned back toward the living room, where I still sat waiting. He crossed the room slowly and stopped about 10 feet away. Behind him, the Christmas tree lights pulsed red and green. The house held nothing but the low hum of the heating system. No more relatives, no more witnesses, no more staging, just the two of us looking at each other without the performance between us for once. "You look healthy, Dad," he said. The warmth had drained entirely from his voice. "I've always been healthy, son." Neither of us came close to smiling. I stood, lifted my coat from the chair, moved toward the door. Derek didn't step in my path, didn't say goodbye, watched me go with the same expression I'd seen on patients who had just grasped that their diagnosis left no room for hope. 14 days remained, and we both understood what was bearing down on us. Those 14 days moved the way a countdown does when the outcome is already fixed. January 7th, 8 o'clock at night. My study in the Brentwood house, the mahogany desk buried under evidence files. One lamp throwing long shadows across walls that had watched me practice medicine for 35 years. Garrett sat across from me, laptop open, papers sorted into clean stacks. He looked up from the pile. "Everything's ready," he said. I nodded. "That's what I'm afraid of." He didn't try to soften that, just opened the first folder. Audio transcript, 8 minutes, 3 seconds, Cala's recording from November 17th. Your son's voice walking Stafford Gilmore through the guardianship petition. Crystal clear, no room to argue about intent. I had listened to that recording a dozen times over. Could have recited whole passages from memory. My son's voice, he doesn't know anything, he's old. Planning to transfer the Brentwood house the moment approval came through. The house I'd built for Mirabelle. Garrett moved to the next stack. Debt dossier. 3 failed development projects. Total exposure approaching $2 million. Settlement deadline March 15th. 3 investor groups with active lawsuits. Motive established beyond question. He worked through the evidence with the same methodical calm a surgeon brings to a checklist. Bank records documenting the unauthorized withdrawals from Mirabelle's memorial account. Stafford Gilmore's fabricated psychiatric evaluation side by side with the actual test scores showing perfect cognitive function. Dorian Stanwyck's conflict of interest. The rental agreement for the black SUV that hit me. Airtight, thorough, overwhelming. Witness list, Garrett said, pushing the final document across to me. Barnett Calloway will testify to your mental competence. Petra will testify about the documents she signed without grasping what they authorized. I'll present the financial evidence and legal analysis. He paused. And Calla will present the audio recording. I looked at her name on the page. Calla Aldridge, 19 years old, my granddaughter. The girl who'd made that recording because she was frightened and wanted something to hold on to, something to tell her mother. Tomorrow she would walk into a courtroom and testify against her own father. I handled a case like this once, Garrett said, his voice quieter. Different facts, but the same architecture. A daughter testified against her father in a fraud case, told the truth, kept her mother from financial ruin. He let a beat pass. They never spoke again. 20 years later, he died. She didn't come to the funeral. I stopped, stared at Calla's name in black ink on the witness list. The room went still for a long moment. Garrett didn't reach in to fill it. Just let me sit with what tomorrow was going to cost. The case is airtight, I said finally. Every piece supports our position. The audio alone would be enough. Stack it against the debt, the fraud, the rental car, there's no defense Derek can mount. I know. So why does it feel like I'm the one going on trial? Garrett closed his laptop and sat back. Because you are. Not in any legal sense, but morally. You're asking your granddaughter to choose between her father and the truth. Nobody should be in that position. She made the recording. She's 19. She was scared. She didn't know what it would turn into. I lifted the witness list again, studied her name. Thought about Christmas at Derek's house, the way she'd hugged me carefully around my shoulder and told me she loved me. What would you do? I asked. I'd give her the choice, Garrett said. Tomorrow morning before court, tell her she doesn't have to testify, that you can win without her if it comes to that you won't think differently of her either way. Can we win without her? Probably. The rest of the evidence is solid enough. But Calla's voice introducing that recording, that's the moment his case doesn't just lose, it collapses completely. The difference between winning and making it impossible for him to deny a single thing. I set the witness list on the desk, got up and went to the filing cabinet where I kept Mirabelle's old estate documents. I wasn't entirely sure what I was looking for. Then I found a photograph tucked inside Mirabelle's estate file from 2008, slipped in at some point and forgotten. The image stopped every thought I'd had about strategy. Calla's 5th birthday party, spring of 2008. Pink dress pigtails, a gap-toothed grin that filled the whole frame. Derek had her up on his shoulders, both of them laughing at something beyond the edge of the picture. Mirabelle stood beside them with her hand resting on Derek's arm, the three of them looking like a family built to last. I'd taken that photograph. I remembered the exact moment. Remembered thinking my son had become a good father, that whatever wreckage he'd left behind in his 20s, he'd steadied himself, built something real, poured himself into that little girl. That was 16 years ago, before the failed projects, before the gambling debts, before he came to need my death more than my life. What is it? Garrett asked. I passed him the photograph. He studied it for a long moment. She looks like Mirabelle, he said. She is like Mirabelle. That's the problem. What do you mean? Mirabelle never flinched from hard truths, never dressed something up as fine when it wasn't, never chose the comfortable version over the honest one. I took the photograph back. Calla is Mirabelle's granddaughter. I can give her the option to step away tomorrow, but I already know what she'll decide. She'll testify, Garrett said. She'll testify because that's what Mirabelle would have done, and Calla knows it. I slid the photograph back into the file, shut the cabinet, returned to my desk where tomorrow's evidence sat waiting in its perfectly damning order. Garrett began closing up his laptop. I should let you sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Tomorrow my son answers for what he's done, I said. He paused. And you? I'll be fine, I said. I've had practice. He looked at me. Losing the people you love, I clarified. I've had practice. Tomorrow came. The judge was already speaking when I took my seat. January 8th, 9 o'clock in the morning. Davidson County Probate Court. The courtroom was smaller than I'd pictured. Dark wood paneling, high ceilings, rows of benches, nearly empty except for Barnett in the back there as moral support. Judge Harriet Wyndham presided from the bench, mid-60s gray bun, a no-nonsense bearing earned across 20 years of deciding cases exactly like this one. Derek sat at the respondent's table with his new attorney. Chet Beauchamp was young, visibly nervous, clearly unprepared for what he'd agreed to take on 2 weeks ago. I sat at the petitioner's table with Ms. Treadwell, the sharp probate litigator Barnett had recommended, while Garrett positioned himself directly behind us, evidence folders arranged with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Judge Wyndham glanced down at her notes. This is a hearing on the petition for guardianship filed by Derek Aldridge seeking to be appointed guardian of the person and estate of Conrad Aldridge. Mr. Beauchamp, you may present your case. Chet Beauchamp rose, smoothed his tie, cleared his throat. Your Honor, we are here today because my client is deeply concerned about his father's welfare. Ms. Treadwell got to her feet without hurry. Your Honor, may I present evidence regarding the true motive behind this petition? Judge Wyndham looked at her, then at Beauchamp, then back. Go ahead. Ms. Treadwell opened the first folder drawing on the financial tracing Garrett had assembled. The court should know that the petitioner is currently carrying financial obligations approaching $2 million. 3 failed development projects, multiple investor lawsuits, a settlement deadline of March 15, 2024. She slid copies across financial records, court filings, debt summaries to the judge and to Beauchamp. The judge's pen stopped mid-note. The petitioner has been systematically taking money from his father's accounts, Garrett continued from behind us. We have evidence of unauthorized withdrawals, forged authorization signatures, and fraudulent instruments designed to shift Mr. Aldridge's estate into trusts the petitioner controls. Beauchamp stood. Your Honor, these are serious allegations without my substantial documentation, Garrett said, which I'm prepared to present in full. But first, I'd like to place on the record a conflict of interest that was never disclosed to this court. He turned toward the gallery. Dorian Stanwyck is present in this courtroom today. Originally retained as the petitioner's attorney, he withdrew citing an unspecified conflict. I'd like to clarify the nature of that conflict for the record. Dorian was 3 rows back. I'd spotted him when I walked in but hadn't acknowledged him. He looked older than I remembered from 2008, grayer, heavier, but his eyes carried the same careful, intelligent quality. Mr. Stanwyck, Garrett said, you're a licensed elder law attorney, correct? Dorian rose slowly. I am. And you provided legal services to Derek Aldridge at some point in the past, correct? A pause. Yes. So you had an attorney-client relationship with the petitioner? Yes. And Mr. Stanwyck, do you have a scar on your chest from a March 2008 coronary bypass surgery? Dorian's hand moved without thinking to his sternum. I do. Performed by whom? The courtroom went quiet. Conrad Aldridge, Dorian said, his voice barely above a murmur. So to be clear, Garrett said, you were retained to build a legal case against a man who saved your life 16 years ago on behalf of a client whose matters you had previously handled. And you disclosed neither conflict to this court. Derek stood abruptly. What are you doing, Dorian? What is he talking about? Dorian kept his gaze on the judge. Your Honor, I withdraw as a potential witness in this proceeding. I have a conflict of interest I should have brought forward immediately. I apologize to the court. Mr. Stanwyck. Beauchamp started. I'm sorry, Dorian said again, and this time he was looking at me. I should never have taken this case. He walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click that fell on the room like a verdict. Beauchamp stood frozen. Judge Wyndham made a note. Garrett settled back beside me. And Derek. Derek wasn't watching Dorian leave. He was watching me. And for the first time in months, what I saw was my son, not the architect of a scheme to take everything I owned, not the desperate man who'd forged my name and hired a fraudulent psychiatrist and possibly pointed a rental car at me. Just my son. 43 years old, perspiration showing through his jacket, sitting across from the realization that his lawyer had no defense and his key witness had just walked out of the room. His conspiracy was disintegrating in front of him in real time. He looked worn out, defeated, sad in a way that had nothing to do with defiance. I held his gaze and returned nothing, no sympathy, no softening, just the same clinical attention I'd trained on patients for 35 years. Judge Wyndham broke the silence. Mr. Beauchamp, do you have additional witnesses to present? Beauchamp looked at his notes at the empty seat where Dorian had been at Derek, who was still fixed on me. Your Honor, I'd like to request a brief recess to consult with my client. The judge checked her watch. 15 minutes. We'll reconvene at 10:30. She stood. Everyone stood. She left through the door behind the bench. Derek stared at me across the courtroom. No anger, no defiance, just exhaustion and something broken underneath it. I held the look but gave nothing back. Beauchamp touched his arm, trying to get his attention. Derek didn't move. 14 minutes remained before we'd face each other again. The recess lasted 14 minutes, long enough for Derek to understand his case was folding, not long enough to do anything about it. Judge Wyndham returned to the bench. We stood. She sat. We sat. Mr. Kincaid, she said, you may call your first witness. Garrett stood. Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Petra Dunmore. Petra walked to the witness stand before anyone could move to stop her. I hadn't known for certain she was coming. Garrett had told me it was possible that she'd agreed to testify if necessary, but part of me had held out hope it wouldn't reach this point, that Derek's own wife wouldn't have to be the one to bring him down. But there she was, 40 years old, wearing a gray dress, carrying a manila envelope. She was sworn in, took her seat, and looked at Garrett, not at Derek. Mrs. Dunmore, Garrett began, you are married to the petitioner Derek Aldridge. Yes. And you signed several documents over the past 6 months at your husband's request? Yes. Did you understand what those documents authorized? No. He told me they were routine estate planning done for Conrad's benefit. Garrett stepped toward the witness stand. When did discussions about your father-in-law's estate begin? Petra's voice was steady. April 2021, 2.5 years ago. Mirabelle was still alive. Derek said we needed to act before she changed the will. The courtroom went still. My hands found the edge of the table and gripped it. April 2021. Mirabelle had died in January 2022. 9 months before she was gone, my son was already mapping out how to take everything we had built together. Do you have evidence of these discussions? Garrett asked. Petra opened the manila envelope. Internal emails, text messages, bank records, all of it tracing the timeline. She passed them to Garrett, who entered them as evidence. I watched Derek at the other table. He was whispering urgently at Beauchamp. Make her stop, I heard him say. Beauchamp just shook his head. Garrett walked Petra through each document. The unauthorized account access, the forged signatures, the asset transfer forms she'd signed without understanding. She answered every question with the composure of someone who had decided the truth mattered more than loyalty. When Garrett finished, Beauchamp declined to cross-examine. Petra stepped down from the witness stand, walked past Derek without a glance, and took a seat in the gallery beside Barnett. Your Honor, Garrett said, the plaintiff calls Calla Aldridge. The door at the back of the courtroom swung open. My granddaughter walked in wearing a university jacket, her old phone held in both hands. 19 years old, too young to be carrying this, too much like Mirabelle to walk away from it. She was sworn in and sat down. Her hands were trembling. Ms. Aldridge, Garrett said, his voice gentle. Can you tell the court what you're holding? My old phone from high school. I keep it in my bedroom drawer. And does that phone contain a recording? Yes. Made when? November 17th, 2023 at night. I heard my father talking in his office. His voice sounded strange. I was frightened. I pulled up the voice memo app because I wanted something to remind me to tell my mom, and then I forgot it was even running. Have you listened back to that recording? Yes, after I handed the phone to my grandfather. And who can you hear speaking on it? Calla turned toward Derek for the first time since she'd taken the stand. My father and Dr. Stafford Gilmore. Garrett ran a cable from the phone to the courtroom's audio system. Your Honor, I'd ask the court's permission to play this recording now. Judge Wyndham nodded. Garrett pressed play. For 8 minutes and 3 seconds, every person in that room sat and listened to my son engineer my undoing. Derek's voice came through clean and sharp. No warmth in it, nothing resembling a son. The guardianship petition needs to be filed before December. He doesn't know anything. He's old. Stafford, I need you to weight the report heavily toward memory and orientation. Stafford's voice answered. What if he contests it? Derek, he won't. He doesn't even know it's being filed. Then the debt, the timeline, the settlement deadline. And then Derek again. Once the court approves the guardianship, I'll transfer the Brentwood house into the trust immediately. That's the priority. The house first. Silence fell the moment the audio ended. Nobody stirred. Calla remained motionless at the witness stand, tears sliding down her cheeks. Derek stared at her across the room, his eyes bloodshot, his palms pressed flat to the table. I watched my granddaughter pull her lip between her teeth exactly the way Mirabelle used to when she was holding herself together. That's my father, Calla said, speaking to the judge. Recorded November 17th, 2023. Garrett offered a quiet thank you. She rose, moved past Derek's table without a glance in his direction, and was gone. Judge Wyndham wrote steadily for several minutes while the room waited without breathing. Then she set down her pen. The petition is dismissed. Mr. Conrad Aldridge's capacity is not in question. His son's conduct is. Her eyes moved to Derek and stayed there. I am ordering this file transferred to the Davidson County District Attorney for criminal investigation. Elder financial exploitation is a Class C felony in Tennessee. Fraud upon the court is a serious offense. The evidence of unauthorized account use is substantial, and the allegations regarding the November vehicular incident require review. Another notation. Mr. Derek Aldridge, you are prohibited from leaving the state of Tennessee pending this investigation. This hearing is adjourned. She pushed back her chair and disappeared through the door behind the bench. I had prevailed in every legal sense and felt nothing I wanted to feel. Garrett began gathering his folders. Barnett stepped down from the gallery. Petra sat motionless, hands clasped, eyes fixed somewhere past the room. Calla had already left. I got to my feet. "Conrad!" Derek's voice came from behind me, ragged, cracking at the edges. I stopped walking, kept my back to him, said one word: "Don't." Then I pushed through the courtroom doors and kept going without turning around. I sat in the passenger seat of Garrett's rental car and couldn't make myself reach for the ignition. My fingers hovered there and trembled, and it had nothing to do with age. The engine was already running, Garrett behind the wheel, the heat blowing dry air carrying a faint trace of industrial cleaner. We hadn't exchanged a word since the courthouse steps. Outside, January snow descended in slow, purposeful flakes over the asphalt. I watched them layer themselves across the hood, each one built for the same purpose, none of them identical the way the testimonies had been, the way my family had been. "Want to know what keeps playing in my head?" I said at last. "Dorian Stanwyck, the attorney who put the scaffolding together on Derek's petition." Garrett turned slightly. "What about him?" "I kept him alive. Flat. Plain. No drama in it." August 1993, Knoxville General. Walked in on the edge of an acute coronary syndrome, shouldn't have made it to the hospital, let alone through the day. I was the physician covering emergency that shift. Spent hours stabilizing him until the surgical team could get there. Garrett's jaw went tight. God, Conrad. He sent a bottle of Tennessee whiskey every Thanksgiving for 5 years after that. Had a little girl 3 years old, brought out her photo while he was still in the recovery bed. I let my head fall back against the headrest. And then he built the legal cage my son tried to lock me in. It sat between us like something with weight. 37 years of stitching people back together, telling every resident who ever trained under me that each patient deserved your whole effort no matter what. And the man I'd pulled back from the edge had handed my son the paperwork to finish me. That's what made him walk away. Garrett said, his voice low. Not sentiment once Petra came forward, once the fraud was obvious. He had no viable path. He got out before it buried him. I watched the snow fall. He didn't leave because he owed me anything. He left because the case was lost. When exactly does a win start feeling like the thing you were running from? Garrett waited before speaking. "Where are you sleeping tonight?" Barnett put me up at the Holiday Inn off Interstate 65. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes. "Derek's attorney tomorrow morning at 9. Final paperwork on the asset division. Very orderly, very professional. Do you want me there?" "No." I held his gaze. "Thank you for all of it. But there are rooms a man walks into by himself." He gave a slow nod. The kind that doesn't need an explanation behind it. We'd each built careers out of making the hardest calls in spaces where no one else could come. "The recording," I said. "Calla's 8 minutes and 3 seconds. When did she actually bring it to you?" "December 22nd, 7 in the morning, door of my hotel room." Garrett's face shifted, something almost soft moving across it. "She'd had it since Thanksgiving. Said she wasn't going to let her mother take you apart, even if standing up meant losing everything between them." 19, I said almost to myself. Making the kind of decision that breaks grown people. "She inherited your backbone, Conrad. It doesn't matter who raised her." Maybe. Or maybe a few people come into the world with something calibrated inside them that runs toward truth even when the cost is everything. I thought about Calla holding steady on that stand, reading the evidence back into the record, and the moment Petra understood that her own daughter had been watching. Outside, the snow kept at it. The lot had emptied out around us, a handful of cars, the courthouse lit from within its windows, burning amber against the gray. Inside those walls, clerks were processing the documents that would finish restructuring what was left of my family. Papers formally confirming that Derek held no power over my home, my money, my life. I'd gotten everything I came for. It tasted like ash. "I fly back to Virginia tomorrow afternoon," Garrett said. "But call me any hour. That's not a formality." "I know it isn't." I put my hand on his shoulder and held it there a moment. "You've given more than I had standing to ask for. You pulled me back in 1984, twice by my count. I'd say we're square, but we'd both know that's not true. You showed me that coming back from impossible was something a person could actually do. I was just collecting on the lesson. 2 old men with too much history and just enough left to be grateful for." Then I opened the door and walked out into the snow. The lawyer's conference room had been designed to offend no one. Beige walls, inoffensive prints, coffee that tasted like a decision nobody felt good about. January 10th, 9 o'clock in the morning. Derek sat across from me with his attorney, a precise woman named Vivian Ashford, who had likely started billing before she took off her coat. He was right, my son. I'd been a more dedicated physician than I ever managed to be a father. That recognition surfaced somewhere between studying the asset division spreadsheet and signing off on the dissolution of the conservatorship petition. I looked across the table at Derek, 43 years old, silver threading through his hair, dressed in a suit worth more than my first car, and what I saw behind his face was the years I'd given to hospitals instead of to him, the plays I hadn't attended, the dinners I'd left early, the explanations I'd offered to a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 16-year-old. Someone else's father needed me more tonight. Had I made him into this, a man who ran calculations where feelings should live, who'd looked at me and seen an obstacle to be cleared. The signing took 40 minutes, initials in boxes, signatures on lines, formal language confirming the conservatorship had been mutually withdrawn on account of changed circumstances. Bureaucratic packaging around what had really happened. Derek put his name on each page without once meeting my eye. His hand never shook. When Vivian Ashford stepped out to file the documents, the room held just the two of us. The quiet that came down was nothing like what Garrett and I had shared in the parking lot. That silence had been the kind between people who understand each other. This silence pressed. "Do you ever think you helped make me this way?" Derek's voice came out level, almost offhand. I had options. I could have cataloged his choices, laid out his debts, named every fraud he'd willingly constructed. Could have pointed out that plenty of sons grow up with a father who wasn't there and still don't reach for something like this. Instead, I looked straight at him. "You're right," I said, "and I'll carry that." Something crossed his face. It might have been surprise or the dim recognition of something he'd stopped expecting. For just a moment, I could see the kid from the kitchen table bent over model airplane pieces, asking me to show him how to grip a baseball, wanting nothing more complicated than time. Then he stood, and that closed, and he was gone. 2 days after we left the lawyer's office, the bell at my front door rang at 6 o'clock in the evening. January 12th. The snow had quit, and the world outside sat cold and scrubbed clean. I pulled the door open without expecting anyone. Calla was standing on the porch next to her mother, 19 years old. Frost settled across the shoulders of her dark coat, eyes already full before she could say a word. She moved forward and put her arms around me, and neither of us spoke. Her shoulders were shaking. I held her and looked past her at Petra, my son's wife, 51, thin, in the way grief strips weight from a person no makeup. Her face told me she'd been crying for days. "I'm so sorry," Petra said, her voice fracturing around the words. "I should have done something to stop him." I guided them both inside into the living room where Mirabelle used to settle in with her medical journals. The house was overwarm. I'd been running the heat high since I came back, as if warmth could fill the space where other things used to be. Calla sat next to me on the sofa, still holding my hand. Petra took the edge of Mirabelle's chair, fingers laced together like someone bracing for judgment. "He deceived you the same way he deceived me," I said, keeping my voice even. "What he chose to do, that belongs to him, not to you." I believed every word. Petra's eyes were swollen. "When he told me you were slipping when he produced the bills, the conservatorship paperwork, I accepted all of it. I should have come to see you myself. I should have asked harder questions." "He's a convincing man," I said. "He's had years of practice at it." Calla's fingers pressed tighter against mine. I tried to tell her at Thanksgiving after I'd recorded them. She didn't believe me until the lawyer laid out all the debt evidence in front of her. "Derek told me those were business investments," Petra murmured. "Strategic expansion. He said the conservatorship was about protecting you." I looked at this woman, the one my son had married 22 years ago, the mother of my only grandchild, someone who'd been manipulated as completely as I had, just with a different set of lies. "I forgive you," I said, "both of you, fully." Petra's composure broke. Calla began to cry again, quieter than before. I let them feel the weight of it. The family that had cracked apart, the man they'd believed Derek to be. The guilt they'd been carrying that was never theirs to carry. "What happens from here?" Calla asked when the silence had stretched long enough. "With the DA, with Dad?" "I don't know. Barnett says the investigation could run for months." I squeezed her hand. "But whatever the outcome, it doesn't touch what's between us. You're my granddaughter. I'll see you through college, through medical school, if that's still the road you want. None of this mess falls on you. Will you ever forgive him?" Her voice was small. She was hoping for something I didn't have to offer. I thought about the conference room, about Derek's question about 3 decades of choosing surgery over being present. Honestly, I don't know, sweetheart, I said. But I won't let what he did eat the rest of my life. Barnett Calloway's office. January 14th, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Garrett sat beside me. Documents covered the conference table like blueprints for a life I'd had to rebuild from scratch. New will, Barnett said, sliding the papers toward me. Revocable trust. Joint financial power of attorney to Garrett Kincaid and myself, both signatures required for any major decision, so no single person can ever do what Derek attempted. I signed where Barnett indicated. My hand moved steadily, steadier than it had felt in months. The Mirabelle Aldridge Legal Aid Fund, Barnett continued, $250,000 set aside specifically for elder abuse victims who can't cover legal representation, and $100,000 for Brentwood Medical Center's medical scholarship program. Mirabelle's money doing what Mirabelle always did, going toward the people who needed it most. 35 years in this town, I said. Might as well amount to something. Garrett leaned back, something quiet and warm moving across his face. Mirabelle would be proud of this. Maybe. Or maybe she'd have set all of it up years ago if I'd paid more attention when she talked about legacy instead of telling her we still had time. One more thing I'd gotten wrong. One more lesson learned with a delay. But the funds would exist now. Students who couldn't afford the climb would get a foothold. People facing what I'd faced would have someone in their corner with legal standing. Something solid rising from the rubble. Barnett walked us through the rest updated beneficiaries' provisions. For the house, guaranteed support for Calla's education regardless of however Derek's legal situation resolved. Methodical. Thorough. The kind of planning that should have been done years back. By the time we finished, the afternoon had gone gold. Winter dusk arriving before you notice it's coming. Garrett and I moved through the parking lot without talking. Coffee tomorrow morning, he said, before I head back. Brentwood House porch, I said. 8 o'clock. He nodded. We both understood what was behind the offer, one last quiet hour before the world pulled us back in separate directions. January 16th. Dawn arrived clear and hard with cold. Garrett showed up at exactly 8 o'clock with 2 cups from the diner. We sat in the porch rockers, the same chairs where Stafford Gilmore had run his fraudulent assessment 3 months before. Steam lifted off the coffee. Neither of us felt the need to fill the silence. We'd both spent entire careers in rooms where silence said more than words could. After 20 minutes, Garrett set his empty cup on the porch rail and got to his feet. I should get moving. Thank you, I said, for everything. We shook hands firm, unhurried, the grip of 2 men who'd come through something together and knew it. He went down the porch steps toward his rental car, paused at the door and turned back. If anyone else ever needs help, call me. No reason required. The words drifted in the cold air. Not a professional courtesy, a friendship that had been forged under pressure but was built to outlast it. I nodded. He got in. I watched the tail lights shrink down the driveway and vanish into the gray morning. The coffee in my hand was still warm. The porch sat empty around me. The house behind me held 40 years of decisions, the sound ones and the ruinous ones alike. I set the cup down and went back inside. On the shelf in the living room where Mirabelle had kept the book she reached for most, I found the medical textbook she'd given me for our 35th anniversary. Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine. I had never once cracked it open, too busy, too distracted, always certain there would be a later. I carried it out to the porch and settled back into the rocker. It felt lighter than I expected. I opened the cover and began to read. When did I stop counting the days since my son last called? I was sitting on the Brentwood House porch in late January, the same rocker where this had all begun 4 months ago. Coffee steamed in the cold air. Harrison's Principles lay open on my lap, Mirabelle's anniversary gift. I'd been reading it every morning since Garrett left. It felt less like a memorial now and more like a conversation I'd been putting off for too long. Somewhere between January 16th and this particular morning, I'd stopped tracking Derek's silence, stopped waiting for my phone to light up with his name, stopped measuring my days against his absence. The realization surfaced without pain. It simply was. Calla's car turned into the driveway at 9 o'clock, an aging Toyota Corolla that clicked when the engine cooled. She got out carrying a backpack and a biology textbook thick enough to do damage. "Grandpa," she called, taking the porch steps 2 at a time. "I need help with my homework." "Medical school applications are still a year away," I said, though I was already smiling. She dropped into the chair beside me, Mirabelle's chair, and flipped the textbook open to a chapter on the circulatory system. The diagrams were the kind that oversimplify the explanations vague in that way that makes a practitioner's teeth itch. "Can you explain how cardiac valves actually work?" she asked. "My textbook is useless." I put my coffee down. "Think of them as one-way doors. They swing shut the moment pressure reverses on them. Tricuspid and mitral govern flow into the ventricles. Pulmonary and aortic manage outflow. When they fail, blood backs up. The heart labors to compensate. In the end, it gives out." She wrote in the margins fast and neat. "That's so much clearer than valves prevent backflow of blood." "Textbooks are written by people who've studied the heart on paper," I said, "not by people who've held a failing one. They describe the event, they don't tell you what it costs." We worked through the rest of her questions: systemic versus pulmonary circulation, oxygen exchange at the alveolar membrane, how the coronary arteries keep the heart itself perfused. I answered each one the way I used to answer residents on rounds, precisely and without talking down to them. Calla absorbed everything, pushed back with follow-up questions, drew her own diagrams when mine weren't clear enough to suit her. She had Mirabelle's disciplined mind, and something beyond that, an urgency to understand not just what the body does, but why it breaks down. After an hour, she closed the book and sat still for a moment, looking out at the bare trees beyond the porch railing. "Grandpa," she said at last, "I think I want to go into medicine." I looked at my granddaughter, 19 years old, the girl who had quietly recorded a conspiracy, who had stood in open court and told the truth, who had chosen what was right over what was easy, because lives are what matter at the end of it. She had Mirabelle's eyes, and she had Mirabelle's quality of certainty, the kind that doesn't waver once the mind is made up. "I know, sweetheart," I said softly. "I know." She leaned across and kissed my cheek. "Will you guide me through the applications? Tell me what it's genuinely like." "Every step, I promise, but I won't paint you a flattering picture. Medicine takes everything from you. You have to decide whether what it returns is worth the price." "Was it worth it?" she asked. "For you, I thought about 37 years of emergency calls and empty chairs at dinner, about patients given back their lives and families held from falling apart, about Mirabelle dying, while I was somewhere down a hallway teaching residents about Derek growing up in the margins of my attention and becoming someone I can barely place as the boy I raised." "Yes," I told her, "even after everything. Yes." She nodded, then rose and headed for the door. "I'll see you next weekend. I'll be here." I watched her taillights fade down the drive. Then I opened Mirabelle's textbook and went on reading. Late that night, I was in my study. The house had gone quiet save for the clock on my desk, a gift from the Johnson family 20 years ago, given after I delivered their third child during a February ice storm. Cherry wood case, brass face, a steady tick that counted seconds without passing any verdict on them. Derek's folder was sitting in the bottom desk drawer, shut. I hadn't touched it since the trial. Didn't need to. Whatever the district attorney's investigation produced would unfold on its own without any help from me. Barnett would keep me in the loop. If questions were asked, I'd answer them. Beyond that, my son's decisions were his to own. On the desk, cold coffee, Mirabelle's medical textbook, a letter from Brentwood Medical Center about the scholarship fund. The first recipient would be named in March. The clock ticked on, steady, indifferent. The Johnsons had given it to me because I'd pushed through conditions no reasonable person would have driven into, reached their farmhouse at 2 o'clock in the morning, and brought a healthy baby girl into the world by lamplight with the power out. "You saved our family," Mrs. Johnson had said when she carried the clock to my office. "We wanted to give you something that would last." 20 years still keeping perfect time. I thought about Dorian Stanwyck. August 1993. Knoxville. A man I'd never laid eyes on bleeding in the doorway of my clinic at 11 o'clock at night. The hospital had turned him away, no insurance, no ID, no promise of payment. I hadn't asked his name, hadn't asked whether he could pay, hadn't sought permission from anyone. I simply walked in and got to work. 11 hours of surgery brought him back. He sent a bottle of Tennessee whiskey every Thanksgiving for 5 years. Then he helped my son draft a conservatorship petition designed to erase me. And when Barnett showed him the evidence, when Dorian understood the case was built on fraud, he withdrew. Because he remembered. Because pulling him back from the edge in 1993 created a conflict of interest in 2023 that helped crack open my son's conspiracy. The clock wasn't marking time passing, it was marking lives continuing. 37 years of walking in without asking permission, of doing the work because someone needed it done. And that is where the story finally rested. Not with noise, not with anger, just with the truth, sitting out in the open where it couldn't be hidden anymore. I've thought a lot about what all of this cost me. A season of my life I won't get back. The image of a son I thought I knew. My ribs, my left arm, and more than a few nights of sleep. But I've also thought about what it gave me. And I believe God placed the right people in my path at the right moments, not by accident. Garrett, Calla, Barnett. The clock on my desk still ticking. Some things you lose, some things hold. If these grandpa revenge stories have taught me anything worth passing on, it's this. First, document everything quietly and early. The truth doesn't defend itself, you have to build the record before you need it. Second, the people you showed up for in their darkest hour may well be the ones who show up for yours. Never underestimate the reach of a single act of decency. Third, if someone moves to take your voice, your name, or your rights, do not wait for permission to fight back. Waiting is not the same as wisdom. Fourth, in father stories like this one, the ending is rarely about winning. It's about refusing to disappear. If any of this reached you today, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs to hear it, a parent, a friend, anyone who's been made to feel like they no longer matter. Leave a comment and tell me what stayed with you. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to Grandpa's Revenge so you're here for the next one. Thank you for listening all the way through. I'll see you next time.